Good afternoon and welcome to the National Capital Planning Commission's October 2nd, 2014 meeting. For everyone in attendance today, please note that the meeting is being live streamed on the NCPC website, and we do have a quorum, and so we will proceed with this meeting as has been publicly advertised, the agenda. Agenda item number 1 is the report of the chairman, and I have two things to note. First is about our very exciting Pennsylvania Avenue initiative. The National Capital Planning Commission is working in partnership with the National Park Service, the GSA, and the District of Columbia to engage in what is likely to be a 2, if not 3-year effort to identify near-term actions and long-term strategies to improve operations, maintenance, and programming for our historic Pennsylvania Avenue. On Friday, September 19th, NCPC, on behalf of the Pennsylvania Avenue Steering Committee, partnered with the Downtown Bid to kick off the Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative. We had a speakers event at the museum in their night conference center. The event was entitled Residents to Presidents. It included a discussion with a distinguished panel about how Pennsylvania Avenue can meet local needs and national needs in a 21st century capital city. The discussion was moderated by Zachary Schrag, a history professor at George Mason University, and who is the author of The Great Subway Society, A History of the Washington Metro. We were pleased to welcome back our old friend Gabe Klein, former DDOT director, who is an entrepreneur and former director of DDOT, and also Ellen Ryan, who is with the National Trust for Public Lands and is a fellow in their creative placemaking program. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Beth White, who traveled from Chicago to be part of the event, as well as Commissioner Bradley Provencia and Peter May, who are also on the steering committee. And if you weren't able to make it and you'd like to see it, you can see the event on the NCPC website. The second item I have is the National Eco District Conference was held here in Washington just this past week. And I had the honor of participating on the Friday morning plenary session, and we talked about sustainability and the urban regeneration of the district, and our friend Harriet Dragoning was on the panel as well. The Southwest Eco District was featured as a case study in the Net Zero Neighborhood discussion later that day. So the energy surrounding the entire conference was great, it was inspiring, and we had people from all over the country and abroad who attended it. And it was a terrific event. And Elizabeth Miller and Diane Sullivan played critical roles in its planning. With that, that ends the chairman's report. And if I could for a second, turn it over to Commissioner May.
Thank you very much. This is very hard for me to do, but I'm trying to make my way through it. I just want to acknowledge the untimely passing of our colleague, Steve Lorenzetti. He came before this commission on several occasions and was known well to many of us. And I would just ask for a moment of silence to recognize his passing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. May. Agenda item number 2 is the report of the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you is a written copy of my report. I just have one item to add. NCPC will be holding a public scoping meeting on the proposed renovations to the Martin Luther King Library on October 7th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the MLK Library. This meeting will be an open house format and will include a brief presentation at the start of the meeting. The presentation will start at 7 p.m. and will include a discussion of the purpose and need of the project and issues to be analyzed in the environmental assessment. And that, Mr. Chairman, now concludes my report. As a matter of personal privilege, I would also like to extend my condolences to our colleagues of the National Park Service, as well as to the family of Steve Lorenzetti. He was a consummate professional, and he will be missed. He, as Mr. Mace said, he had presented many times in front of this commission, but from the staff side, he was also a joy to work with then. And we will certainly miss him.
Indeed, we will. Thank you very much. Other comments for Mr. Acosta? Any questions on? Hearing none. Agenda item number 3 is the legislative update. Ms. Schuyler.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have two items to report. The first is House Joint Resolution 120, which approves the location of a commemorative work within Area 1 to honor the more than 5,000 slaves and free black persons who fought in the American Revolution. The resolution passed the House and the Senate in mid-September, and it was signed by the President into law on September 26th. So we will no doubt be seeing an application for this in the future under the commemorative works. The second item is another commemorative work. The item is House Representative Bill 4690. This authorizes the establishment of a National Emergency Medical Services Memorial on federal land in the district or its environs to honor the commitment and sacrifice of the emergency medical service providers. The bill was introduced in the House in May, referred to the House Committee on Natural Resources, which in turn has referred it to the Subcommittee on Public Lands and Environmental Regulation. That concludes my report.
Questions of Ms. Schuyler? Agenda item number 4 is the consent calendar, and we have only two items. One is number 4A, the master plan for the Naval Support Facility at Carter Rock, and 4B is the Quantico Middle and High School at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Mr. May.
I just wanted to note the Park Service appreciates greatly the work of the Navy to accommodate the concerns that have been expressed by the stewards of the adjacent parkland, and they in fact have sent me their recommendation that we commend the Navy for their work with us on this project. So,
good.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Hearing none, is there a motion on the consent calendar? It has been moved and seconded. All in favor of the consent calendar say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Passes. Agenda item number 5A is the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial. And let me say just a few words before we get started as Mr. Detman makes his way to the podium. We all know that the Eisenhower Memorial is an important and historic project. That it has had a non-traditional design has generated a lot of public interest and conversation. This commission and NCPC staff, however, has been guided by the law. And there are two acts in particular. First is the National Capital Planning Act. That sets forth our authority and defines our capital improvement process, and it gives us the authority to act on things like height and bulk and massing and setbacks and all of those kinds of things. The second, and arguably more on point, law is the Commemorative Works Act, and the elements of that guide our deliberations and our work is the surroundings, the location of the memorial, the materials and its durability, landscape, those kinds of things. And all of those have been a focus, but most notably, if I could pick a few, the surroundings and how the memorial sits in the surroundings. The materials durability, as you know, we spent a long time working with the applicants on that, and then the landscaping, and that's going to be an increasingly important part of the facility. We also have been guided by 7 design principles that were set forth very early in the process. These design principles were part of the National Environmental Policy Act, or as we know it as NEPA. And those design principles are relative to the site, the specific site where the memorial is proposed. So the Commission is guided by the project's adherence to the law, and it's not guided by our personal opinions on a project's aesthetic design. Again, this has been a progressive design and has generated a lot of conversation, but we are guided by not that so much as other elements. The types of criteria that have driven our decision and staff's work and analysis are things such as the respect for the L'Enfant Plan and the Macmillan Plan, the scale and massing and the size of the project relative to the site where it is proposed. How the project serves a public space has been an important part of our analysis. Preserving important and historical views and view sheds has been important, and then such things as rights-of-way and building setbacks and lines and those kinds of things. So all of these kinds of criteria are what have driven staff analysis and what will be at the center of the Commission's discussions today. And now just a word on the process for this hearing. Mr. Detman has been the project manager, and he will give the executive director's report. And the EDR, the executive director's report, lays out the staff recommendations to the Commission. After that, we will have a public hearing. We have about 10 or so people signed up to speak, some speaking as individuals, some speaking for an organization. After the public hearing, we'll bring the matter back to the Commission, and we will deliberate. And during our deliberations, at any time, a motion may be put on the table, whether for an amendment or to pass it, or whatever the case may be. And then last, let me note this. The matter, the question before us today is for the preliminary approval of the site and building plan. We still have one more step to go, potentially, and that would be for final approval, of course, assuming it passes today. If it doesn't pass today, we remain sort of where we are at the preliminary approval stage. So any questions of?
Procedural, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you defined it when you spoke, but I want to be sure that we'll get a chance to hear the public witnesses maybe before we move to the discussion by the Commission. Sometimes we get ahead of them, then we end up creating some tones that we then have to deal with when they testify.
Yep.
So I wish we can hear them first, which is our mission. Yep. To listen to the public and then give our presentations or comments or concerns.
As I noted,
I can't control what people say, but
right.
I just think we ought to take it in that order.
Yep. As I noted, as soon as Mr. Detman has finished his presentation, we'll go straight to public hearing. Okay? Mr. Detman, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, members of the Commission. As the Chairman stated, staff is here today to provide its recommendation on a revised preliminary design for the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial, which has been submitted by the National Park Service on behalf of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial Commission. As you know by now, the site is located in southwest D.C. on a 4-acre site that's bound by 4th Street. Just get my laser pointer here. On 4th Street on the east, 6th Street on the west, and Independence on the north. Immediately south of the 4-acre site is the Lyndon Baines Johnson Building, or the Department of Education headquarters. Maryland Avenue, the historic 160-foot right-of-way, traverses the site from 6th Street over 4th Street on access with the Capitol, effectively bisecting the site into 2 triangles, one to the north and one to the south. Notably, there are several mid-rise federal office buildings that surround the site, including the Wilbur Wright Building, or the headquarters to the Federal Aviation Administration, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, located to the north of Independence Avenue, and directly east is the Wilbur Cohen Building, which houses Voice of America, as well as office space for the Department of Health and Human Services. There are some other federal office buildings and museums in close proximity as well. Just a closer look at the existing site, showing existing conditions. Currently, the site is under 3 different jurisdictions. The Maryland Avenue right-of-way is currently under the jurisdiction of the District Department of Transportation. To the north, a small portion of Reservation 5, which currently has a community garden and an outdoor exercise facility, is under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. And then to the south of Maryland Avenue is largely a paved plaza that's sparsely vegetated. It was constructed at the same time as the LBJ building, and that portion of the site is under the jurisdiction of GSA. Ultimately, upon construction of the memorial, all 3 of these pieces of property will be consolidated, and jurisdiction will reside with the National Park Service for perpetual maintenance of the memorial. Just very quickly, just a note about the site selection process that took place in 2006. The Eisenhower Memorial Commission, after considering 26 sites, ultimately identified this one as their preferred, which the Commission approved back again in 2006. Reasons for support for this memorial was given its size and its accessibility, opportunities to locate living memorial components in adjacent buildings, as well as the thematic relationships that the occupants in the surrounding buildings have to Eisenhower's legacy. In addition to the Planning Act and the Commemorative Works Act, as the chairman mentioned, NCPC is reviewing this project for conformance with 7 design principles, which the commission adopted as part of its site approval action and incorporated into its finding of no significant impact under NEPA at site selection as well. The overarching intent of these principles is to create a memorial within an active urban park that reflects and respects key characteristics of the historical enfant plan regarding the shaping of view corridors and public spaces. Also to create a place for commemorative reflection that also functions as a park and can accommodate public gatherings. Just wanted to spend a minute talking about the influences that the current revised design has, and specifically that inspiration for the organization of the memorial. The applicant drew inspiration from the organization of the Lincoln Memorial and the layered experience that visitors encounter as they approach the Lincoln Memorial. In terms of its form, the Lincoln Memorial sort of takes the form of an object within a temple within a surrounding context where the object is the statue of Lincoln that's flanked by well-known quotations. The temple is defined by a surrounding colonnade which defines the memorial core, and then the context, of course, is the expanse of the National Mall. And so as visitors make their way towards the Lincoln Memorial and up that monumental set of staircases, they go through a series of layers where the steps sort of begin that transition from the expansive landscape of the mall towards the commemorative core. And that colonnade, again, serves as the threshold between the mall and the memorial core where the commemorative experience really takes place. And, of course, the Lincoln Memorial is the statue within that enclosure. The overarching concept of the memorial remains the same. It's not only to commemorate Dwight D. Eisenhower's achievements as a military general and a president, it also commemorates the humble way in which he approached these roles based on a set of Midwestern values of strength, humility, and modesty he acquired during his upbringing in Abilene, Kansas, which guided his decisions and fueled his remarkable achievements. The applicant's execution of that concept continues to take the form through the use of a series of elements which are shown to you here. It's a memorial core containing sculptures and quotations, the use of stainless steel tapestry and columns in the landscape, a memorial information center to provide visitor amenities, as well as a new promenade that will serve as a formal entrance into the LBJ building, and then there's a pending lighting scheme. And so while the elements have remained consistent, the manner in which the applicant has used these elements has evolved over time. As you can see here, this is the site plan from the 2011 concept that the Commission reviewed in February of 2011. And in its comments, the Commission expressed support for a modern and innovative type of memorial, including the possible use of large-scale stainless steel tapestries. And also in its comments, the Commission noted or made comments about the scale and placement of the tapestries and the imbalance created along the corridor of Maryland Avenue. It commented on the configuration of the tapestries and the impact that it had on the Capitol being the dominant element in the viewshed, and also regarding the configuration of the tapestries and the impact that that had on the dominance of Maryland Avenue's diagonal in relation to the orthogonal street grid. These are just some pictures of what the 2011 concept looked like at that time. Most recently, in April of 2014, the Commission reviewed a preliminary design and actually took its first action on the project. And ultimately, the Commission voted to disapprove the project, though it did reiterate its support for a modern and innovative memorial, including the possible use of large-scale stainless steel tapestries. And the Commission's action was based upon primarily on account of the scale and configuration of the 3 proposed tapestries and the impact that they had on the Maryland Avenue viewshed, the relationship of the design to the building lines established by the adjacent buildings along Independence Avenue, and then the relationship of the memorial to the adjacent buildings. The Commission had requested the applicant to address certain general planning-related issues, such as pedestrian circulation, perimeter security, and lighting, which have not been addressed thus far because the applicant has focused on addressing the most significant issues raised by the Commission back in April. But I'll note that staff and the applicant already are in the process of scheduling a meeting to start talking about those additional planning issues raised previously by the Commission. The last note is that the Commission found that based on the results of several rounds of tests conducted by the applicant, that the proposed stainless steel tapestry component met the durability criteria of the Commemorative Works Act, which was a fairly large milestone in the research and development of that particular element. And this is just some pictures of what the April preliminary design looked like. Looking at the current site plan of the revised preliminary memorial design, I'll say that several of the elements remain consistent with what they were back in April, again, because the applicant focused its energy on resolving the most significant issues raised by the commission. The current plan continues to propose a memorial core that serves as the main area where the commemorative experience occurs. And within the memorial core, there's sculpture, bas-relief sculpture, freestanding sculpture, as well as quotations and excerpts from Eisenhower's speeches. The applicant continues to propose a use of large-scale stainless steel tapestry along the south of the site. And this is where the biggest change has occurred to the design since April, where previously there were 2 other tapestries proposed for the east and west of the sites. The 2 east and west tapestries have been eliminated, and in their place, a single freestanding column has been placed just north of the south tapestry, approximately 155 feet to the north, in fact. There's a landscape design, there's a memorial information center, an LBJ promenade, as well as signage and lighting, which we'll take a little bit closer look at in a minute. Before looking at the elements, I wanted to take a moment to describe the conceptual organization of the memorial and talk about the visitor experience that the applicant is trying to achieve through this design. I've already mentioned the organization and the visitor experience with the Lincoln Memorial and the inspiration that the applicant has drawn from that, and this idea of a commemorative object defined by a series of layers that evolve from a commemorative core. And so here we're seeing a site plan of the existing or the current proposal. Within that red box is that memorial core where the commemorative experience is to occur. And then flowing out from that is an urban park or a contemplative park that sort of buffers the commemorative core from the urban surroundings. And that park is defined by the south tapestry and the 2 freestanding columns. The area that's defined by the tapestry and freestanding columns also sort of serves as a threshold between the contemplative park and the surrounding urban environment. And so in terms of what this means for the visitor's experience as they approach the memorial, I'll take you through a couple graphics where the red dot on the diagram shows sort of the vantage point as from the perspective of a pedestrian. And so in terms of upon approaching the site and arriving at one of the northeast or northwest corners of the site, the applicant would be welcomed into an arrival plaza. And then proceeding down an entrance walkway, they would reach that point where the contemplative park or the urban park defined by the tapestries and the freestanding columns, where they cross that sort of threshold into the park space where they're buffered from the urban surroundings in the park. And then finally, moving into the memorial core across special paving that defines that area where the commemorative experience takes place against the backdrop of the commemorative tapestry. So this is just an image of the model prepared by the applicant, where you can see the idea of the tapestry and the columns working together to define a volume of space separate from the surroundings. So looking at quickly at some of the memorial elements, and again, a lot of them have remained the same, so I won't spend too much time on them. But looking at the memorial core, this is an area that will be defined and read differently from any of the approach walkway paving. So special paving will be used within the core, and then within the core there'll be 2 areas of bas-relief sculpture blocks as well as freestanding bronze sculpture, which will honor or commemorate Eisenhower's achievements as a president, military general. In addition, there'll be a statue of Eisenhower as a young man situated on an overlook wall, sort of looking out towards his future achievements as president and general. The bas-relief blocks and freestanding sculpture will measure approximately 12 to 15 feet in height. That's the bas-relief blocks, and the freestanding bronze sculpture will approximately be 8 to 10 feet. On top of each of those blocks will be a 9.5-foot limestone lintel block that will have a singular quote, a well-known quote taken from Eisenhower's past. On the back of each of these limestone blocks will be an excerpt or a full version of text from a speech. On the back of the military block will be Eisenhower's Guildhall address, and on the back of the presidential block will be excerpts from Eisenhower's 2 inaugural speeches, which highlights his focus on foreign policy. So this is just looking at some pictures of the memorial core, and you can see the scale of the limestone blocks and freestanding sculpture with the lintel block. And this is just a picture of the statue of Eisenhower as a young man, which will be placed again on an overlook wall looking out towards the sculpture. Moving on to the memorial tapestry and columns, I noted that this is where the most significant changes to the design have taken place since April. And this is a diagram showing the April 2014 arrangement and configuration of the tapestries. Again, as you'll recall, there were 3 tapestries proposed in this sort of U-shaped configuration, which were intended to sort of define the site separate from the surroundings. And I noted that the east and west tapestries, which are shown in these locations, aligned parallel with 4th and 6th Street, have been eliminated. And you can see how the relationship of those east and west tapestries to the Maryland Avenue right-of-way, which is identified in these blue dotted lines, as well as the historic cartway, sort of shaded in blue. Here's a diagram showing the existing design, and what you can see is the proposed south tapestry, as well as the 2 freestanding columns shown by these red dots. You can also see sort of dotted in there are the locations of the previous columns that supported the east and west tapestries. And what you can see here is that the south tapestry remains around 447 feet long along the north facade of the LBJ building, and approximately 155 feet north of the end columns of the south tapestry are the 2 freestanding columns, and you can see how they work together to kind of define that park space. The 2 freestanding columns, the west one has been placed almost directly on the edge of the northern edge of the 160-foot Maryland Avenue right-of-way. That east column is situated in line with the end column of the south tapestry and aligned with the west column, and it's situated within the 160-foot right-of-way by approximately 32 feet. This is a section looking at the relationship of the south tapestry to the LBJ building. The south tapestry continues to be approximately 71 feet from the north facade of the LBJ building. From grade to the top of the tapestry is approximately 80 feet. The tapestry itself, the stainless steel itself, is raised approximately 20 feet above grade in order to allow pedestrian movement below the tapestry, and then the tapestry is 60 feet to the top. The columns that support the tapestry, as well as the proposed freestanding columns, are approximately 10 foot in diameter and 80 feet high. They'll be clad in limestone. The imagery on the south tapestry continues, the proposed imagery continues to be a landscape imagery taken from Abilene, Kansas, which again, in addition to serving as a defining element of the south edge of the memorial site to create some visual separation from the LBJ building, I noted that the tapestry also has commemorative value in honoring the values that guided Eisenhower throughout his career. These are some photos of some tapestry mock-up samples that were also placed on site as well as off-site and provided opportunities for interested stakeholders to view. The tapestries will have a range of transparencies, as you can imagine, as you move your way from the Kansas landscape above the horizon. The amount of openness as you move your way to the top of the tapestry will become more transparent, with the lower areas being a bit more opaque. Just looking at the model, you can see the relationship of the south tapestry to the freestanding columns, and then there's Maryland Avenue traversing the site. Here you can see the relationship of the memorial core with the south tapestry as a backdrop, showing the Kansas landscape, and the dialogue that the applicant is trying to create between the imagery of the landscape on the tapestry to the statue of Eisenhower as a young man, and then the connection between the Eisenhower as a young man statue to his future accomplishments honored in sculpture as well. This is essentially looking along the walkway towards 4th Street. You can see the east freestanding column and how that marks the entry into the park space, and this is looking from 4th Street back towards the core, again with the freestanding column identifying that area or that transition into the contemplative park. The memorial landscape remains essentially the same. There have been some minor modifications made to the walkways in order to accommodate the placement of the freestanding columns. There'll be 2 main approach walkways from the northeast and northwest of the site, leading down towards the memorial core, which will be a different kind of paving, as I mentioned, from the memorial core. You can also see the treatment of the Maryland Avenue historic cartway with a groomed lawn, and then outside the historic cartway there'll be a looser lawn to sort of reinforce the existence of the Maryland Avenue cartway. There'll be a combination of large canopy trees and flowering understory trees to kind of create a layered effect, and to relate to the imagery of the tapestry. And these trees will be arranged in informal groves that touch the edges of the historic cartway to help define that view towards the U.S. Capitol, which you can see here, where you can see the landscape starting to work with that groomed lawn, and on the edges, that looser lawn, and then the large canopy trees helping to frame that view towards the Capitol. This is another framed view looking from the sidewalk of Independence Avenue, looking across that looser lawn towards the memorial against the backdrop of the tapestry. Here you can start to pick up the difference in paving materials from the core out to the walkways looking out towards 4th Street, towards the Wilbur Cohen building, and then back towards the memorial core, where you can really start to see how the layers of canopy, understory trees and canopy trees are creating that park experience as you transition towards the memorial core. The design continues to have a memorial information center, as it did back in April. It's a very modestly designed building, kind of tucked off to the southeast corner of the site. It's a one-story building that'll be that'll have a precast facade, or a precast system for its facade, with some aluminum details for awnings and whatnot. The program for the building will be restrooms, as well as some maintenance and storage areas for the Park Service for memorial maintenance, a ranger contact station, as well as a small bookstore. LBJ Promenade continues to be planned along with the design of the memorial, and is intended to serve as a new entry forecourt to the LBJ building. And it's sort of designed with 3 distinct areas. On the west will be an area that could be used by the Department of Education for exhibit space. Along the east, outdoor seating. It sort of relates to the location of the LBJ Building Cafe. And then a central area that could be used for public gatherings associated with the Education Department or the memorial itself, that extends slightly beyond the tapestry and creates a memorial overlook towards the north. I also noted that there's a lighting scheme which is currently under development, but what we do know about the lighting scheme, the applicant's intent for the lighting, is that it strives to achieve a sort of a layered lighting effect, where along the ground plane there'll be some lighting under benches or along pathways, and then the second layer will be lighting the memorial core, and then the third layer of lighting will be a consistent line of lights along the base of the tapestry, sort of shining up, which you can get an idea here. This is a picture from when the tapestry mock-up samples were placed on site. Moving into project analysis, I won't read these site selection design principles. They're provided to you in the beginning of the report, but I'll note again that they were adopted by the Commission in 2006 as part of its site approval and incorporated as required mitigation in its FONSI. I've already noted what the overarching intent of these principles are. So staff's analysis of the revised design applied these principles. We focused on those 3 particular principles, which are highlighted in yellow here. These are the 3 principles that the Commission previously determined that the design did not satisfy. So we focused on those, but also went back to make sure that no new inconsistencies were created as a result of the modifications to the design. In terms of the 4 principles that were previously determined to be satisfied and the need to incorporate significant green space, I think it's telling by looking at these 2 images that this particular principle will continue to be met. Currently, the site is approximately 70% paved and 30% green space, and essentially what's proposed is a complete reversal of that, where the revised design approximates about 70% green space and 30% paved. Regarding the need to respect and complement the architecture of the surrounding precinct, as you know, the surrounding buildings are largely mid-rise, mid-century modern buildings, and staff, as well as the Commission, has supported a modern and innovative memorial in its approach to use of commemorative elements like the innovative stainless steel tapestry. There's also a relationship between the surrounding buildings and the use of some of the materials, such as limestone, in the memorial. The design continues to enhance the nature of the site in a sequence of spaces along Maryland Avenue, where you have Capitol Hill, and then you'll have the memorial site. To the west will be Reservation 113, which hopefully in the future we'll see some improvements in terms of its quality as an urban park or a civic space, and then there's the green space down at the Portal site. So you can see how Maryland Avenue is embellished with a series of public spaces. And then finally, with regard to the need to create a unified memorial site that integrates the disparate parcels, which I've already touched upon, into a meaningful and functional public gathering space. You can see by comparison of the existing conditions and then the proposed site plan, not only can you see that the site is actually assembled three parcels go into one cohesive design public space. But by assembling the disparate parcels into a cohesive whole, it also helps the surrounding buildings define that park space. So looking at the three principles that previously the Commission found to be not satisfied, looking at the need to respect the building lines of the surrounding rights-of-way, in April, staff took a minute to kind of describe the interpretation or the evolution of that particular principle, noting that in the site selection environmental assessment, it was noted that it was the adjacent buildings that defined that setback along Independence Avenue. And that at the concept stage, you can see how the two tapestries that were at the time were aligned with Independence Avenue kind of fell just south of that line. And then in April, when we looked at a preliminary design, those two tapestries were rotated 90 degrees, and staff noted to the Commission the presence of that northern column on the west tapestry. The revised preliminary design resolves that issue by removing the east and west tapestries and then positioning the two freestanding columns just south of that particular line along Independence Avenue, as well as the placement of that west column right on the edge of the Maryland Avenue right-of-way. Here you can see a picture of what that looks like. In terms of the need to preserve reciprocal views to and from the U.S. Capitol along Maryland Avenue, this first one is looking at the site plan of the February 2011 concept, and you can see shaded in blue is the historic cartway. In assessing satisfaction with this principle, the staff and the Commission has focused primarily on three things. One being the mass and the scale of the memorial elements and their placement relative to the 50-foot cartway as well as the 160-foot right-of-way. The open and horizontal character of the viewshed, as well as the dominance of the Capitol within the viewshed and of the Maryland Avenue diagonal over the orthogonal street grid. And so a concept what the Commission commented on was the scale and placement of the tapestries and the imbalance that created along the corridor. The configuration of the tapestries and the impact that had on the Capitol being the dominant element in the viewshed, as well as the configuration of the tapestries and the impact that had on the dominance of the Maryland Avenue diagonal over the orthogonal street grid. You can see this is just a picture showing the view up Maryland Avenue in February 2011, where the scale and the configuration of the tapestries and the impact that has on the dominance of the Capitol as well as the Maryland Avenue diagonal. In April 2014, we looked at a scenario where there were three tapestries, again, oriented as you can see in this diagram. And what you see here is in the salmon color is the Maryland Avenue cartway, as well as in these blue lines is the distance that was created between the framing elements of the two tapestry, the south tapestry column and the west tapestry column. And so in April, the distance between the two framing elements was approximately 90 feet, measured equidistant from the center line of Maryland Avenue. And this is a view of the model looking towards the Capitol from April of 2014. The Commission determined that the scale and configuration of the tapestries narrowed the width of this important view shed from 160 down to 95 feet, which is a width that is typical of a regular grid street found throughout the city, resulting in a substantial diminution of what is intended to be one of the city's most influential and important symbolic monumental views. In addition, the Commission found that the tapestries also changed the avenue's prevailing civic, more horizontal character that is typically associated with the city's broader avenues. Looking at the proposed configuration of the tapestries and the columns and what that does in terms of our ability to satisfy this particular design principle, I'll note that, again, here's the south tapestry with the two freestanding columns. And highlighted in yellow is the area that serves as now the unobstructed view towards the Capitol. I noted previously it was about 95 feet wide. What's being proposed now is approximately 135 feet wide, which is about 84% of the 160-foot right-of-way. In terms of the memorial elements that were located in the right-of-way, this revised alternative eliminates one of those 80-foot tall, 10-foot diameter columns from the right-of-way. It also eliminates approximately 78 linear feet of the tapestry from the right-of-way itself. And so as proposed, staff now considers this principle satisfied, and you'll see that staff is recommending that as the applicant continues to evolve and refine the design towards final, like any other project does, that it continue to explore ways to perhaps enhance the openness of Maryland Avenue right-of-way and the view shed. Finally, looking at that last principle and the need to reflect L'Enfant Plan principles in shaping the memorial space, back in April, staff took a minute to look at some existing L'Enfant squares and circles, and we looked at DuPont Circle and Farragut Square and more recently created squares at the U.S. Naval Memorial, and looked at those as good examples of how buildings shape public space, which back at site selection, it was stated by the D.C. SHPO that really is the essence of the plan, the shaping of public space with the buildings that surround it. And with this principle, we also recognize that there's also a need to balance certain things as we want to successfully achieve another important goal of NCPC, in that we want to integrate memorials and get them off the mall and integrate them into the city. And so we know that we want to balance not only the creating or reflecting L'Enfant Plan principles, but also we're cognizant of the applicant's desire to make a bold gesture and sort of announce this site as at a scale that's reflective of a presidential memorial. And we want to make sure that we retain as much as possible those thematic relationships that were so influential in the selection of this site back in 2006. So staff considers this principle to be satisfied on, and in terms of if you take a look from an outside-in approach, in April 2014, staff's analysis commented that with the configuration of the tapestries, and specifically the east and west tapestries, the relationship between the adjacent buildings and the memorial was more between the side tapestries and the buildings, as opposed to the buildings actually serving as defining elements of the memorial core and the park space. What you can see in this diagram to the right is the current sort of a diagram showing the sequence of spaces and the visitor experience. And with the removal of those east and west tapestries, those two buildings on the east and west can now serve as active defining edges to the park and the memorial core, and have that dialogue, that sort of symbolic dialogue as the story of Eisenhower is interpreted. But at the same time, it still makes a gesture to define a space that's separate from the surrounding environment. This is a prior view from 4th Street looking towards the core, and that's the previously proposed east tapestry, and this is what's proposed currently looking towards the core. And then from a sort of an inside-out approach, this idea of these disparate parcels being unified into a unified whole, being the commemorative core and the contemplative park space, that in and of itself helps the surrounding buildings serve as defining edges to the park, and in terms of reflecting L'Enfant Plan principles, it's that public space that's now very orderly shaped by the buildings that surround it. And this is looking from the core out towards 4th Street with the previous proposal, and then now looking out, and you can see the Wilbur Cohen building, and then looking south towards the LBJ building. I noted that, or the chairman noted that the commission is guided, or is reviewing this project for conformance with the National Capital Planning Act as well as the Commemorative Works Act. The Planning Act establishes NCPC as a central planning agency and is tasked with the creation or the protection and preservation of important historical and natural features. The CWA, we're reviewing for consistency with the purposes of the Act as well as specific decision criteria of that Act. Staff has concluded the project is consistent with the purposes of both of these statutes for many of the same reasons that I've already mentioned during my analysis of the site selection design principles, and specifically with regard to how the memorial design relates to historic features, and notably the L'Enfant Plan. The CWA specific decision criteria, staff finds that all of these criteria have been met, noting the Commission's prior finding that the stainless steel tapestries have successfully met the durability criteria. We will note that the Commission in April requested that at the final review stage, the applicant come back with information demonstrating that the tapestries continue to meet the same durability standards, and then some information on the maintenance regimen and operational protocols that will be employed to avoid public safety issues if ice and snow accumulate on the tapestry. Finally, staff notes that the CWA currently prohibits acknowledgement of donor recognition, and that based on the information provided to staff to date, there's no indication that donor recognition is part of the memorial design. Staff has also determined that the revised memorial design is not inconsistent with the policies of the comprehensive plan, and that with regard to consistency with the Memorials and Museums Master Plan, staff notes that the revised memorial design satisfies many of 2M Plan's suggested design considerations. With regard to the location, it does respect its location on two special streets. and it does acknowledge its association with the LBJ building. It does strike an appropriate balance between the need to provide public gathering space as well as adequate space for commemoration. And it does substantially preserve the reciprocal vistas and the primary axial relationships along Maryland Avenue. Staff will note one slight inconsistency with the 2M, which was raised to the Commission's attention in 2M, or in April. We'll note that the revised preliminary design continues to include a memorial information center, although the Commission's April 2004 action included a provision stating that this particular element should be removed from the program due to its inconsistency with the 2M plan. Staff's prior review discussed this inconsistency with the 2M plan's design consideration regarding the provision of visitor services and the use of nearby buildings, noting that the 2M plan states that the site is not appropriate for a building. However, as we discussed in our prior report as well as our current report, the inclusion of the Memorial Information Center is a product of the 2006 site selection design process. It's staff's understanding that at the time the idea of locating visitor services was discussed to locate those in the ground floors of buildings, but that idea was actually ultimately considered to be infeasible due to partially due to security concerns as well as other considerations. And so therefore the provision of a modest-sized support building was analyzed in the site selection environmental assessment. It is also referenced in the Commission's site selection FONSI. I've already noted that there are some recommended general planning issues that need to be addressed by the applicant, and those still need to be addressed. And as I noted, we're already working with the applicant to address those issues. And so with that, it's the Executive Director's recommendation to approve the revised preliminary memorial design for the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial, finding that the revised preliminary design to be consistent with the purposes of the Planning Act and the Commemorative Works Act. Also finding that the result of the modifications made to the project following the April 2014 review of the revised preliminary design satisfies NCPC's adopted site selection design principles. To note that in accordance with NEPA, the Commission finds that the Commission's action to approve the revised preliminary memorial design will not have a significant impact on the environment, and that the Commission makes this finding relying upon the 2 environmental assessments that were prepared, the revisions made to the design since completion of those assessments, and the Commission's finding that the revised preliminary memorial design satisfies the site selection design principles. To note that the revised preliminary design continues to include a memorial information center, and that the Commission's April 2014 action included a provision stating that this element should be removed from the program. To note that the Commission's April 2014 comments on pedestrian circulation, perimeter security, and lighting have yet to be addressed by the applicant, and notes that as this is still a preliminary design, and the project will continue to evolve as the applicant continues through the design review process and advances the memorial design towards final, and therefore recommends that the applicant further develop and refine the design, that they continue to explore ways to strengthen the overall concept of the memorial as a layered experience consisting of a memorial core within a park within a surrounding urban context, enhance the openness of the Maryland Avenue right-of-way and viewshed, and to improve the symbolic and physical relationship of the memorial between the memorial and the Department of Education building, and to request the applicant to continue working with staff and return to the Commission prior to submitting for final review to report on additional modifications made to the memorial design, including changes that incorporate NCPC's previous comments on pedestrian circulation, perimeter security, and lighting, and respond to any additional comments from NCPC, the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, and Section 106 consulting parties. Finally, looking at the Commemorative Works Act, we find that the project successfully meets the specific decision criteria enumerated in the CWA, including the requirement that a commemorative work be built of durable material suitable to the outdoor environment, noting the Commission's prior finding. We'll note the Commission's prior request for additional information at final regarding the continued achievement of the durability standards, as well as information on the maintenance regimen that's going to be employed to clean the tapestries and operational protocols to ensure public safety. And then finally, notes the Commemorative Works Act currently prohibits donor recognition, and that based on information provided thus far, there's no indication that the design includes donor recognition. With that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my recommendation. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Detman, thank you very much. Very well done. As noted earlier, however, we will proceed straight to public comment. Should Commission members have questions for Mr. Detman, hang on to them. He will be back. We have 11 persons signed up to speak, representing themselves, And as such, you'll be afforded 3 minutes. If you're representing yourself as an individual, you get 3 minutes to speak. We also have 4 seemingly representing organizations. If you represent an organization, you get 5 minutes to speak. There is a clock on the wall, and you'll hear a gentle beep at the end of your time. I will let you finish your thought, but please do wrap up in short order so that we can move along. The first person, and these are in order of sign-up. The first person is Mr. Anil Telang. I believe you're representing yourself, so you have 3 minutes. And on deck would be Sam Roche, and after Mr. Roche, Mr. Justin Shubo. So, Mr. Telang, welcome. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Anil Telang. I'm from Rhinebeck, New York. After all this rationalization of the design, to me, the question really is, do we have the discipline to follow him? Eisenhower's values and his purposes are clear throughout his career. His focus was never strictly military. It was for each citizen in every walk of life, from the dignity of the individual to the strength of the nation. But there is no personal engagement here. There is no collegiality. I wish I could read to you. Well, if you go to his report, Colonel Eisenhower's report in 1930 to the engineer, to President Hoover, on national infrastructure, it harkens back to his cross-country tour a decade before. It anticipates the National Defense Highways Act, but it sets more importantly, it sets the plans for the arsenal of democracy. So to his workforce programs as president, when have you heard this? There is no future prosperity for any except as the whole shall prosper. In the 1952 campaign in the boomtown Detroit, he said, "We have escaped the divine right of kings. There is no divine right for executives." His farewell fundamentally was a regret and a caution that the individual, the private sector, had not matched the growth of the state. In a speech at that time earlier, he'd said, "The more we allow a centrally directed authority to take these responsibilities and to exercise the necessary authority that goes with responsibility, the more we are deserting the great responsibilities on which rest our rights and our individual liberties." These past 13 years, our vicious enemy has sought to exhaust our every military force, where the force that he can't match, our culture, our civilization, has gone unread, has been increasingly estranged. Are we going to squander this high point, not of our nation, but of each individual with it? How many stories have you heard? Why do we call it the greatest generation? Just go back to the beginning. June 14th, 1911. But when we raised our right hands and repeated the official oath, there was no confusion. A feeling came over me that the expression, the United States of America, would now and henceforth mean something different than it ever had before. From here on, it would be the nation I would be serving, not myself. Suddenly, the flag itself meant something. You had agonized over this great beacon, the viewshed of one of the great beacons of our democracy. This memorial looks the other way. I think we need to have the courage. Well, Mr. Issa said.
Please wrap up your.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Everywhere in our country, we see the communities these workers made, and we are responsible to them. Let's have the courage to make that moment come real to each visitor to this site. I don't think this does that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slang, very much. Next up is Mr. Sam Roche, representing an organization. You have 5 minutes. Mr. Shubo after that, and then after Mr. Shubo, Mr. Don Hawkins.
Thank you. My name is Sam Roach, and I'm the spokesman for a group called Right by Ike, Project for a New Eisenhower Memorial. which seeks to have this memorial designed through the standard public process for national memorials, which the Eisenhower Memorial Commission has so far ignored to such controversial effect. I'm going to quote at length from several sources about the design the Commission is considering today. The first excerpts are from the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Natural Resources, staff report on the Eisenhower Memorial, and the Eisenhower Memorial Commission, released on July 25, 2014, the same day Congress introduced the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial Commission Reform Act. In these excerpts, Commission refers to the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. Quote, Chairman Rocco Siciliano stated at the Commission's March 30th, 2006 meeting that, quote, he had a discussion several years ago with architect Frank Gehry, who indicated an interest in a possible design of the Eisenhower Memorial. Quote, Chairman Siciliano served as the vice chairman of the Los Angeles Philharmonic when Mr. Gehry was commissioned to design the Philharmonic's Walt Disney Concert Hall. Both Mr. Gehry and Mr. Siciliano are honorary life directors of the Los Angeles Philharmonic Association Board of Directors. Quote, rather than establish a design competition that would be open to all interested architects, artists, students, or designers regardless of professional stature or experience, as had been used for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and others, the Commission chose to utilize GSA's Design Excellence Program for the Memorial Design Competition. Quote, the process used to select Frank Gehry as the designer substantially deviated from the standard Design Excellence Program. The evaluation board changed the weight of how the factors would be considered, giving more weight to a designer's portfolio of work and less to the designer's past performance. The low weight given to past design performance and the greater weight given to the designer's portfolio and profile may have assisted in the selection of Gehry, given criticism about previous notable Gehry projects coming in significantly over budget and allegations of leaks and other flaws in Gehry-designed buildings. Quote, in 2011, the Commission authorized the Gehry design team to prepare construction documents for a design that had not been approved. According to the Commission's most recent budget request, these documents are now 95% complete for a design that had not been and is still not approved. Quote, the decision to authorize the creation of construction documents in September 2011 raises significant questions about the work being performed under that task and the Commission's eagerness to move the Gehry design forward at any cost. Quote, as of 2013, the Gehry contract had been modified 23 times, increasing the total value of the contract by almost $6.5 million, nearly 65% of the original contract's value. Quote, the cost under the Gehry contract to create mock-ups of the steel tapestries that form the border of the memorial has thus far increased by 2,300%. Quote, at the Commission's board meeting in 2010, Chairman Siciliano stated that he, quote, hopes for maximum federal support, that precedent exists for 100% federal funding of presidential memorials, and that, quote, it had been the Commission's historic intention to seek 100% federal funding, though planning for private sector fundraising is already underway. Quote, the Commission has received less than $500,000 in annual donations to date and has paid more than $1.4 million to fundraising firms. From the 2014 federal budget bill signed into law in January of this year, for necessary expenses of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial Commission, $1 million. The Eisenhower Memorial Commission requested $2 million for salaries and expenses and $49 million for capital construction. So no capital construction in the 2014 budget. From a letter from John S. D. Eisenhower, son of Dwight D. Eisenhower, to Eisenhower Memorial Commission Vice Chairman Daniel K. Inouye on October 18, 2012. Though the members of the Eisenhower family are grateful to those who conceived of this memorial and have worked hard for its success, we have come to believe that the Eisenhower Memorial Commission has no intention of re-examining the concept. It is apparently interested only in convincing us of the virtues of the present design, ignoring my objections as articulated by my daughters Anne and Susan. We as a family cannot support the Eisenhower Memorial Commission, the Eisenhower Memorial, as it is currently designed, in concept, scope, or scale. We request that lawmakers withhold funding for the project in its current form and stand back from approving the current design. From a letter from Eisenhower Memorial Commissioner Bruce Cole to the National Capital Planning Commission regarding today's meeting. The Eisenhower Memorial Commission has sown confusion and controversy to bring this design before you. Unable to achieve a quorum at its hastily scheduled meeting after little to no discussion of the issues, the acting chairman used a regular parliamentary procedure to solicit voting by mail, thereby precluding the democratic deliberation and public scrutiny essential in current circumstances. After the meeting, several commissioners complained of the unclear ballot language, which may have caused a rejection of the compromise proposed by National Capital Planning Commissioner Representative Darrell Issa, again without necessary public discussion. The circumstances these quotations reveal will likely never produce the kind of broadly acceptable memorial that both the legacy of the subject and a city that represents national unity require. For this reason, we ask that you refrain from aggravating the current controversy by either approving or rejecting the current design. Rather, remit it to the Eisenhower Memorial Commission for the required public discussion it did not have there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Mr. Justin Shubo, followed by Mr. Don Hawkins, and then Dr. Judy Scott Feldman.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished commissioners, my name is Justin Shubo. I speak on behalf of the National Civic Arts Society. As before, the applicant is doing everything it can to avoid showing you what this design looks like. If I may, I'll show you some renderings that show what it really likes and which also show that it still violates the design principles. Slide. While we're waiting, if I may note that the National Environmental Protection Act actually specifically does mention aesthetics, to quote its purpose, to assure for all Americans safe, healthful, productive, and aesthetically and culturally pleasing surroundings. Here's a view showing the objects that interfere with the right-of-way. We have the two columns on the main tapestry, and we also have the third column indicated by the yellow rectangle, which is hidden by the trees. Also, the left bay of the tapestry interferes with the right-of-way. Slide. Oh, great. Here's the view down Independence Avenue from the west. The eastern freestanding column is indicated by the arrow. Here's a close-up. As you'll recall, Fine Arts Commissioner Alex Krieger said that the columns on the side panels look like chimneys. Now that the tapestries are gone, they look even more like chimneys. Here's that view from the east looking west. And here's a close-up. Here is an image from the 1971 San Francisco earthquake. I would note that when we imagine a national memorial as a ruin, we are more likely to think of it as having been destroyed by an atomic bomb or terrorism than a natural disaster. Here's an interesting view from the steps of the Capitol building. As you can see, the column on the right doesn't even look like it's part of the memorial. Here we took the applicant's rendering and inserted a woman at the base who is exactly half the width of the column. Since the columns are 10 feet, she is 5 feet. And so here's a circle. I'm sorry, yes, that's a 5-foot tall person. And here's a close-up. You recall that then Fine Arts Commissioner Diana Balmori said you would feel like an ant next to the columns. Back in April, Representative Issa submitted a letter to this commission in which he said, quote, "I believe this design contains many admirable elements, but it also contains elements that have received justified opprobrium. Its immodesty is unbefitting of the humility and plain-spokenness that characterized our 34th president." Representative Issa was right then, and he is right now. It is no less immodest. The EDR in front of you today addresses the technical questions staff has the authority to review. The EDR does not once address whether the design comports with the very authorizing legislation for this memorial, even though that law is one of only 3 on the agenda today. It's Public Law 106-79. That legislation calls for the building of, quote, "an appropriate permanent memorial to Dwight D. Eisenhower." If you think this design looks like a ruin or an incomplete highway overpass, then you must find it not appropriate or aesthetically pleasing. If you think the bleak winter landscape on the tapestries might as well be Kazakhstan, then you must find it not appropriate or aesthetically pleasing. If you think the gargantuan design is immodest, then you must find it inappropriate and not aesthetically pleasing. This is not a sophisticated question of aesthetics that must be left to art critics. It doesn't take a refined palate to notice that the milk is sour or that the eggs are rotten. The little boy who said the emperor has no clothes was not a fashion expert. As you know, in July, the House Natural Resources Committee released a scathing report outlining the memorial's disastrous financial record, as well as the pattern of irresponsible behavior set by Eisenhower Commission staff. The report accused staff of financial mismanagement, as well as unethical and even perhaps unlawful activity. There are those who acknowledge the severity of the House's report and who also point to the design's many grievous flaws, but who nonetheless conclude we should approve this memorial anyhow because of all the money that has been spent. Such persons fail to consider that we have no reason for thinking that staff's mismanagement will come to an end. Indeed, last month, staff failed to organize a meeting of the Eisenhower Commission that attained a quorum. As a result, there was no discussion among commissioners of the current design, nor of the alternative Representative Issa specifically requested be presented today. Those who acknowledge these severe problems, yet who want nonetheless to build the memorial, are in effect saying that this design is too big to fail. Well, this design is so big, so gargantuan, that it has failed. It is bankrupt financially, and it is bankrupt symbolically. The memorial is a viaduct to nowhere. In conclusion, we are not asking for a design by committee. We are asking for a fresh start and for new management. What we need is a design that is not merely technically okay, one that is just barely passable, like some C- student who just squeaks by. This is our one and only chance to get this memorial right. Eisenhower would never settle for mediocrity, and neither should we. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Don Hawkins, representing the Committee of 100 on the Federal City. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would just like to say one thing. The graphics that have just been shown here are inaccurate. The columns that have been added to Mr. Schuster.
You may want to step to the mic, but just...
So I respect his right to say anything that he wants about the design. However, for him to present inaccurate information to this commission, I think is a disservice.
Why don't we take this up, why don't you hold that thought? We'll take this up at discussion. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Mr. Hawkins, followed by Dr. Feldman, and then Mr. Sam Holt.
Chairman Bryant and Commissioners, thank you for this and for many past opportunities to convey to you the thoughts and feelings of members of the Committee of 100 in what has become a lively public debate in this venue, running in parallel with a public relations free-for-all in others. The memorial to Dwight David Eisenhower has already had a long and very public history. But after all this time, here you are today to judge only its preliminary design. The 7 design principles for this memorial were developed in the 106 process, in which I was pleased to represent the Committee of 100 8 years ago, when we fashioned 11 principles that were consolidated into the 7 that have become the fulcrum of discussion before this commission. I think I speak for many, if not all, of my Section 106 colleagues when I say that we were startled by our first side of the design. In most subsequent discussions, a majority appeared to share my feeling that we had been outflanked, and that if we had conceived of the possibility of this design being found in conformance with the standards, principles, we would have written them so that it could not be. But the medium of design principles is words, while the medium of a memorial is material. And the connection between the two is judgment. The judgment of this commission and its staff, of the Memorial Commission and its staff, of the 106 signatories and consultants, and most importantly, the judgment of the public. This is a pure public art issue. That's rare in Washington, which is, almost nothing is disconnected from politics. But I've not been able to identify any consistent ideological differences between the pros and the cons in this controversy. It's really refreshing. If this memorial is constructed the history of this extended process will become part of its story, part of the memorial. And it hasn't been an entirely pretty story. Among the considerations here today should be whether this dissonant passing narrative that we've all been more or less a part of should be permanently attached to the memorial for Dwight David Eisenhower. Or shall we start over? This concept will have to be not just successful. It'll have to be sufficiently successful to drown out, absorb, eliminate in one way or another thoughts of and impressions from the period that we've been going through, when an awful lot of negative, possibly some justified, some unjustified, but simply information out there in the public that is attached to this memorial, that it's going to have to, in effect, emotionally drown out. Is this memorial going to touch its visitors sufficiently, move them sufficiently, so that they will not be thinking of highway overpasses, drive-in theaters, what I think is an entirely inappropriate landscape. I plan to tell people it's Gettysburg on a bad day when they look up at that screen, because it doesn't look like anything particular. It could have been Loudoun County or Montgomery County. The vegetation is all the same. If the present, what appears to be memorialized by the numbers commemorative element does not get a lightning stroke of inspiration, this memorial will never work. The geometry, I think, has been improved substantially. But when it comes down to it, when the people walk up to these figures or whatever it is that's going to commemorate Eisenhower, it should be something substantially better than what is before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Dr. Feldman.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Bryant and Commissioners. I'm Judy Scott Feldman, a founder and chair of the National Coalition to Save Our Mall, a nonprofit organization founded in 2000 to provide a voice for the public on mall matters, to protect the planning principles enshrined in the historic 1791 L'Enfant Plan and 1902 Macmillan Plan, and to advocate comprehensive visionary planning for the mall in the 21st century. The coalition fully understands that Representative Issa, who is a member of this commission, spoke strongly that he wanted to move this project along. But we reiterate that the design needs to faithfully follow the L'Enfant Plan. The EDR on page 4, quote, finds the revised preliminary memorial design to be consistent with the purposes of the National Capital Planning Act and the Commemorative Works Act, end quote. I will focus my comments on this finding, which the coalition believes is incorrect and should not stand as a justification for approving the design. First, page 28 of the EDR states that the purpose of the Commemorative Works Act is to preserve the integrity of the comprehensive design of the L'Enfant Macmillan plans for the nation's capital. But this design does not do that. L'Enfant was very clear about his grand avenues, writing directly on his original plan that the avenue should be 160 feet. The design's 135 feet is a good beginning, but it would destroy the integrity of the L'Enfant concept. No approval should be given until the design concept protects the 160-foot right-of-way of Maryland Avenue and the grand view to the Capitol, symbol of American self-governance. 2, this commission is responsible to approve or disapprove projects under the Planning Act. However, the EDR as written gives preliminary approval, but then, in recommending numerous design revisions, in essence is asking the design team to change elements of the concept. If the design as currently presented does not yet meet the Comprehensive Plan and the Commemorative Works Act, and we believe it does not, this commission should not give approval. 3, if this design is approved, the EDR sets a further disturbing precedent. What future project will follow the lead and propose a narrow right-of-way for the rest of Maryland Avenue? Even more alarming, approval will set a precedent that could be extended to Pennsylvania Avenue, for which NCPC and the National Park Service are making new plans. For 223 years, the Longfall Plan has been the framework for planning in the Capitol. President George Washington in 1791 presented the plan to Congress and to the American public as a gift and a monument to his memory. That plan unites American constitutional principles, Enlightenment rationality, and a humanistic approach to urban design that has stood the test of time. It's the source of Washington's design geometry, the symbolic relationship of buildings and public spaces, and the unique livability of the Capitol. When we have diverted from it in the past, invariably later generations have recognized the mistake and reinstated Longfall's principles. Generations of planners and developers have respected that legacy, and ancient agencies such as NCPC have been created to uphold the historic planning vision. This agency has a long history of protecting the historic plans as required in NCPC's enabling legislation, often against pressures of political expediency. We urge you to do your duty to the City of Washington and to the American public whose capital city this is. The planning agency's responsibility is to the historical legacy and to the future. We urge you to disprove until and unless the design fully protects that legacy. In conclusion, I'd like to make a personal comment. As an art historian and educator, for whom Washington and the Mall are often my classroom, there is no doubt that Eisenhower is an important part of the American story told in the nation's capital. Rather than approve this flawed concept, an interim measure could be considered. The Eisenhower Commission could set aside a modest sum and enlist a sensitive sculptor to create a statue, something powerful and bold like the statue of Winston Churchill in Parliament Square, London. The statue's base could include inspiring quotations telling visitors of his dual role as general and president. The statue could be placed temporarily at the memorial site, or the statue could be located for the interim at the World War II Memorial to help visitors understand Eisenhower's centrality to our 20th century history, and in full view of the obelisk celebrating our founding general and president. With a statue in place for the interim, the designers could rededicate themselves to creating a truly memorable monument for the American public that also respects the Longfall Plan and the legacy of President Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Feldman. I've lost my... Next up is Mr. Sam Holt, followed by Charles Sills, and then Louis Glambos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Samuel Holt, and I've spent the bulk of my working life in the fields of media and education. I taught American history at the university level, both in a normal classroom setting and in an extension system in which I taught not only adult learners, but also U.S. Navy SSBN crews. I served as head of programming for both PBS and NPR, and was executive producer of the Discovery Channel's first educational project. And as a college dropout, I actually covered Eisenhower's second nominating convention with CBS Television News. Based on this experience, I worked for a short time with the Eisenhower Memorial Commission staff on their concept of a first for a presidential memorial, an electronic package of multimedia materials to enrich and expand the experience for both real and virtual visitors to the memorial. I did that because I firmly believe that a memorial to Ike incorporating public outreach and education is important. And I'm firmly convinced that Ike will be seen increasingly as one of the most important presidents of the 20th century. Having experienced his presidency during my college and graduate years and my beginning of my military service, I know that that presidency was not one of inactivity, as often complained about after the turmoil of the 60s. Beyond these ideas, I also believe strongly that there are powerful personal reasons for which Eisenhower deserves a memorialization. His career represents an almost stereotypical model of the American citizen soldier. Democracy was in his DNA, and his personality made it easy for him to connect with not only the international senior staff which he constructed in Europe, but also with the troops he commanded. And he accomplished most of his strategic aims while holding casualties down. This extraordinary leader had a great technical interest and the skill to implement his vision. He grew up in a Midwest with relatively few miles of paved road, yet left the presidency leaving in place preliminary plans for what was to become the Internet, satellite-based communications, and the lunar landing. He was an agent of change in transforming America, both domestically and in its leadership as a country of unprecedented global power and prestige. And he did it while maintaining a civil political discourse. His world-class legacy deserves a world-class memorial. Thank you.
Next up is Mr. Charles Sills.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, commissioners, my name is Charles Sills, and I've been involved through my life with international business, federal, and Veterans Affairs, presently through the Federal Allies Institute, the Eurasian Business Coalition, and the Veterans Entrepreneurial Task Force. The purpose of my brief testimony here today is to express my personal support for rapid execution of the Dwight David Eisenhower National Memorial as submitted here to this commission, for the plain reason that General Eisenhower and President Eisenhower's stature, honor, considerable achievements, and legacy strongly deserve visible expression and promotion as a model and template for Americans, especially young Americans, and for the world at large. Given my own background in international business, defense policy, energy, and environmental issues, the more I have learned about President Eisenhower's accomplishments on the global stage in regional and international security and in science, enterprise, and education, the more impressed I've become. After leading the Allied forces to victory in Europe in World War II, General Eisenhower was appointed military governor of the U.S. occupation zone in Germany, where he laid the groundwork for the post-war recovery of Europe. He worked under Secretary of Defense James Forrestal on the reorganization of the United States military, and he served as First Supreme Commander of NATO. It is important also to note that Eisenhower had a keen understanding of the technological underpinnings of a strong, effective national defense posture. He initiated the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, which in turn led to the development of the Internet, among other invaluable civilian spin-offs, strengthened American science education by establishing the National Defense Education Act, and he created NASA. On the international stage, Eisenhower ended the Korean War, diffused a potentially wider conflict in the Middle East by intervening in the Suez Crisis, and refined and managed the containment strategy vis-a-vis Soviet communist expansionism. I believe that any citizen anywhere in the world who has sufficient knowledge of contemporary history to recognize the image of General Eisenhower would have an automatic positive response. The purpose of memorializing is to translate that generalized world image into visible and enduring detail. Detail that will educate and motivate people here in the United States and around the world, and new generations. It is necessary to translate Eisenhower's legacy of strong world leadership for democratic values and the sustainment of free nations and conflict prevention through regional security frameworks into actionable lessons. The physical monument submitted to the Commission and the international partnerships, programs, and e-legacy productions that the monument will generate will accomplish this. It will teach. Therefore, I recommend putting in place this tribute to General and President Eisenhower as expeditiously as possible for America and for the world. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next up is Louis Glambos, followed by Susan Harris.
I'm a professor of history at Johns Hopkins. Between 1971 and 2001, I spent a substantial part of my life editing 16 volumes of the papers of Dwight David Eisenhower and studying his career as a military leader, author, head of a great university, first military commander of NATO, and President of the United States. Since we completed the papers, I've been a consultant with the Eisenhower Memorial Commission on matters involving the Eisenhower legacy. On the basis of that experience with Ike, I've come to the following conclusions. First, that Dwight Eisenhower provided the United States with very high orders of vision and leadership in both domestic and foreign relations. Second, that his services to the nation as a supreme commander in World War II and as president during some of the most dangerous years of the Cold War deserve memorialization in Washington, D.C. Third, that the site selected for the Eisenhower Memorial is uniquely suited to a man who started his life in the horse and carriage years of the late 19th century and then ushered America and its military into the space age. Fourth, that the design by architect Frank Gehry does an outstanding job of capturing the values and achievements of a leader who never forgot that he came from the other side of the tracks in Abilene, Kansas. The compromises that Frank Gehry made as he designed the memorial should also remind us that Eisenhower believed firmly that compromise and conciliation were the essence of the democratic society to which he dedicated his life. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Susan Harris. Ms. Harris, you signed up as an individual, so 3 minutes. Yep. After Ms. Harris will be General Kelly. Then after General Kelly will be Bruce Cole.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Susan Baines Harris. I was appointed to the Eisenhower Memorial Commission by President Bill Clinton as one of its original members in 2001. I am honored to serve in this bipartisan effort to memorialize the legacy of a truly great American and world leader, Dwight David Eisenhower. I am also a longtime Washingtonian and have been active over the years in numerous important projects in our nation's capital, all going along with the L'Enfant Plan. We truly need to recognize this great leader, Dwight D. Eisenhower. I moved here in 1947 from the Midwest, shortly after my father retired from the Army Air Corps, and came to Montgomery County. I am here not just as the Vice Chairman of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission, but I'm standing in for our Chairman, Mr. Rocco Siciliano, and also as a grateful citizen and resident of a world-class city, Washington, D.C. I want to thank the NCPC and its staff for its long and hard work as we on the Commission have cooperated and will continue to cooperate to create a lasting and valuable tribute to Dwight Eisenhower. Thank you for your studied consideration of Frank Gehry and the whole team's evolving concepts and helping to maintain a coherent, strategic vision of how the memorial can seamlessly take its place in our beautiful city. Your guidance and leadership have been crucial. Thank all of you. With cooperation and compromise, I believe that our work here today begins an exciting next chapter in this important national project. Thank you.
Thank you. General Kelly?
Excuse my delay, but this is an old Marine Corps cane that was given to me by some enlisted Marines who came back from Iraq and saw me laying in the hospital suffering from a bad back that was bad because I had made a couple of hundred parachute jumps. And so when I left these young Marines, thank God for them, made me a cane and put a wonderful Marine Corps emblem in the back. The reason I'm saying this is I want to tell you in all honesty that despite what you read in a lot of the papers and sensationalism, There are a lot of young people out there today who are great. They're in the service of our country, and they're doing a truly magnificent job. As for me, I am the son of an Army major who died in World War II and an Irish immigrant mother. And with that, in this great country, I still could become the commandant of the greatest fighting force in the world today, the United States Marine Corps. But given that, I also was made a commissioned officer just years before Dwight Eisenhower became the President of the United States. So in reality, he was my president, and a wonderful president, and who did tremendous things for the military, but above all, did tremendous things for the country and for the people of America. There are a lot of people, young people out there who still need role models. And by God, if he's not one, I don't know who is. So what I would like to ask you to please motivate these young people with all of the good things that you are doing. I was the chairman of the Battle Monuments Commission, as some will know. I was involved with your commission on 2 occasions, one for the World War II Memorial and one for the Korean Memorial, and I had great pleasure in working with them. But in the World War II Memorial, one of the greatest incidents of my life, as I looked out upon that tremendous crowd, the largest non-ticketed organization in the world today, and there they were, out there, out living for their country and actually for their leaders like General Eisenhower. So with that, I thank you for listening to me, and thank you for your vote, and God bless you all.
Thank you, General Kelly. The last speaker today is Bruce Cole. Mr. Cole signed up as an individual. 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Bryant, for allowing me to speak. And thank you, NPC commissioners, for your long and hard work on what I know has been a difficult and sometimes controversial memorial. And thank you, General Kelly, for your great service to the nation. The design you will now consider, whatever its original merits, has been compromised by the recent attempts to make it conform to the Macmillan and L'Enfant plans. The designer once talked about an open temple and an urban square, or plaza delineated by 3 sets of tapestries. That idea is gone now that the 2 side tapestries have been removed. The freestanding shafts that remain at the corners of the site do not enclose or even effectively demarcate that intended urban square. Their purpose and character are no longer clear without tapestries to support. As the commission at the last NCPC meeting noted when they compared them to something out of the final scene of the Planet of the Apes or to interstate highway overpass supports. Whether even in this compromised form, the design under consideration adheres to the 7 design principles drafted for this site is questionable. I do not believe it serves the public space. It's truly surprising to me that Mr. Gary has sacrificed his artistic integrity and his plan, on which millions have already been spent, simply to get NCPC's approval. If you approve his plan today, you will, I believe, set a precedent that will encourage mere conformity over good design and rational planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. That concludes the public comment period, so we will return the matter to the commission for discussion. If anyone would like to make a motion just for purely discussion purposes to get the matter properly before us, that motion would be in order at any time.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move the EDR.
The EDR has moved and it has been seconded by Ms. Wright, so the matter is before us for discussion. Ms. McCarthy.
I have a question for Mr. Detman. I had very foremost in my mind your comments, Mr. Chairman, about overlooking personal design preferences and focusing on the CWA. So I was listening very carefully when Mr. Detman went through the rationale as to why NCPC had its original objection to design guideline number 6, I believe, and to the purpose in the Commemorative Works Act of not having an adverse impact on the L'Enfant Plan. And so I looked back at page 29 of the EDR about, I guess, starting on the third line, when you say, compared to the preliminary design, the current proposal has minimized impacts to the integrity of the L'Enfant and the McMillan plans to warrant preliminary approval. But I guess I stay puzzled, particularly with respect to the column that intrudes in the 160-foot right-of-way for Maryland Avenue, because it seems to me that the rest of the rationale in that paragraph really just proceeds to make the case that the impact of the present design isn't as bad as the original in terms of its impact. But I don't see where the rationale is as to why that column, which is, as we commented, as several of us commented last session, really unnecessary and very vestigial. Why, when that is such an inconsequential part of the rest of the design at this point, would we potentially compromise the 160-foot right-of-way, as Dr. Feldman was indicating in the potential of that precedent, for just that one element of the design? And I guess I'm not understanding what changed your mind.
Sure. And let me just make sure that I fully understand the question. I think what you're asking is that in terms of the freestanding columns, and particularly the one on the east, which you described as, at this point in time, being sort of a vestigial element in the design, why, since it could be considered as vestigial, why would we compromise the integrity of the 160-foot right-of-way? Well, I think as a functional element, as I mentioned in my presentation, in terms of this idea of making a monumental gesture on the site to announce it as a presidential memorial from the surrounding context of the city, staff does understand the logic that the applicant is using in order to make that gesture and define, a space using the south tapestry and the two freestanding columns to sort of define that space apart from the surrounding urban context. That's what they were trying to do with the three tapestries previously in April. When we assessed the previous design, looking up the Maryland Avenue corridor, narrowing that 160-foot right-of-way down to 95 feet, similar to how we approached that principle at the concept stage in 2011, we were looking at three things. One was the scale, mass and scale, and the placement of monumental elements in relation to the cartway and the right-of-way. In concept, it was very imbalanced, and those monumental elements were sitting directly on the curbs of the cartway. I think at that time, Commissioner May asked, is this really a question of scale? And staff's response was, yes, it's a question of scale in relation to the edges of the right-of-way. And so if you get closer to the center line, you need to get smaller. If you get out towards the edges of the right-of-way, where buildings, would tall monumental elements could be placed, then you can get bigger. And so since concept, that framing of the view towards the Capitol has been increased substantially. It's gone from, I don't recall what it was in concept, but next it was 95, now it's 135 feet. At that point, we feel that that's more than a majority of the 160-foot right-of-way. We think that as a preliminary design, we consider it to be that principle being satisfied. But as you'll see in our recommendation, that we recommend that as the applicant continues to work at the design, they look for ways to enhance the openness of Maryland Avenue, but understanding from staff's perspective that we think that this gesture that they're proposing now maintains sort of their design intent while at the same time preserving the integrity of the axial relationship and the view towards the Capitol.
Well, just to follow up, I guess that's what really puzzled me, because on page 29 and in your conclusions, you conclude that that column isn't having as adverse an effect as at 135 feet as it did at 95 or whatever. But then when you turn around and say, but you recommend we approve it with continuing efforts to enhance the openness, those are big columns. Unless you move it or eliminate it, I don't see what else you could do to increase the openness.
They are big columns, but another thing I would point out is that those columns used to be attached to 90-foot wide tapestries, which with the elimination of the tapestries, you eliminate that obstruction as well. But much like any design, going from preliminary to final, it doesn't have to be a memorial, it could be a building project, a park project. The design will continue to evolve. As the applicant looks at pedestrian circulation, as the way people will move up from the memorial core and down into the memorial, they may find that the position of the columns may have to change in order to facilitate a solution to pedestrian circulation. And if that results in changes to the south tapestry, they may have to reevaluate the relationship of the south tapestry to the position of those east and west columns. And so what we're recommending is that as they continue to look at it, if there's an opportunity to take advantage of a design gesture that further enhances the openness of the Maryland Avenue right-of-way, maybe it goes from 130 to 140, maybe it goes to 160. We don't want to leave that as, we don't want to leave preliminary as, you know, this is the solution, this is the only solution. We, you know, of course we would encourage an alternative that if there's an opportunity to open it up further, they should do that.
But we don't want to say in the EDR, we really don't think that 135 feet is appropriate, and we strongly urge you to move that column so you increase the
I think that's to the Commission's discretion. At this point, staff thinks that in terms of the wording of the EDR, the wording of the principle, preserve the reciprocal views, we feel very comfortable with approximately 85% or 84% of the right-of-way being open, which preserves the actual axial view towards the Capitol, and the Capitol is the dominant element within the framed view shed.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. White?
I guess I'd like to follow up because I had the same, I was puzzled in the same way when I read in the EDR, continue to explore ways to further enhance the openness, and how important is it to maintain the 160 feet. So I guess from the, I just want to put that out there and comment because I really struggled with the challenge of this design site, and I compliment the team for removing the tapestries and being open to these things. And vestigial, I think, is a really good word to describe my reaction to these columns. And as I told Chairman Issa at the last meeting, I would visit the site again. I went back over there this morning. Without the tapestries, these are freestanding columns, and what I recall from the presentation, they're necessary to define the memorial zone. But the plaza defines the memorial zone. So without a function to these columns, no memorial content, it works in plan, and the aerial view is quite compelling, but 99% of the folks who will experience this site will experience it from the ground plane. So I struggle with this idea of approving a preliminary concept, and I'm struggling with these columns. The back tapestry, the interruption of the view shed of the one in the corner there to the east on 6th Street. Can reconcile that one because of the split off going into the education building if you're a pedestrian on the sidewalk or going into the space, but again, I don't know what else they could do but eliminate those columns to achieve what you just said. I struggle with that. So the other thing I noticed, and I haven't seen this in the presentation, what I noticed this morning standing on the opposite side and from the 4th Street is looking back at where the column would sit. You have the Washington Monument in your view, and that's never shown up in any of the presentations as to the impact of the view of the Washington Monument. And I was just wondering, was that taken into consideration as you reviewed the plans? I don't recall seeing anything that incorporated it. Maybe it's hidden behind the trees in these, but did you talk about that?
We haven't talked about it. We haven't seen any drawings or renderings of the view towards the west. The views that we do have from the applicant are taken from within the site towards 4th Street or from 4th Street towards the core. It's certainly something we can discuss with the applicant moving forward.
Because it's something I think is really important. I took a couple pictures. I'll email them to you. But it really struck me that we'd been so focused on the Capitol that we hadn't turned around and looked at the view from the opposite perspective. And it's right there. And just what would that do? So again, the struggle with the freestanding columns and what their purpose is to hold the site, can't the landscape function in that way? And were there other options that were explored to finish off this notion of the open temple? I mean, I'd like to move to approve the EDR with a slight amendment to remove the columns or have stronger language that would define what you were getting at in the EDR to say to continue to explore ways to further enhance the openness. Because I don't think the columns serve the same purpose as they were intended when the tapestries were attached.
A motion is in order. Do you have precise language?
I have a suggestion. On that second bullet, to have it now read, enhance the openness of the Maryland Avenue right-of-way / viewshed by moving or eliminating the northernmost columns.
I think that would satisfy my concern, that we continue to look at that option. Because I worry if we vote to approve them as they stand, it'll never move. So I would accept that language.
Can you repeat it, please?
Enhance the openness of Maryland Avenue right-of-way / viewshed by moving or eliminating the northernmost columns.
The northernmost columns.
Or
plural.
The two freestanding columns.
Right.
I mean, it's part of a recommendation to explore ways to do that, so it gives some flexibility.
Including the removal.
Right, maybe that's a better way.
That's the better way to put it.
Including the removal or elimination of the columns.
Removal or elimination.
Yeah, including the removal or elimination.
Yeah. I was just trying to get including
I'm sorry.
in there. Can you read it again? This is hard.
I'll read what I think you and I have just suggested. To continue to explore ways to, second bullet, enhance the openness of the Maryland Avenue right-of-way / viewshed, including the removal or elimination of the, what do you say, northernmost columns?
Yeah,
Well,
is it removal and elimination? Aren't they redundant when you want to say?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, right, it was removal or relocation of the columns. I don't know if Mr. May would accept that as a friendly amendment to his motion.
Not inclined.
So I take it you moved it, and I presume you seconded it.
I moved it.
You moved it.
She was helping me with the language.
Okay. Ms. White moved it, and Ms. McCarthy seconded the motion, and it's open for discussion. Mr. Wells.
I'm always loath to not support my colleagues from D.C., but I think that we're already dismantling this monument, this plan. In terms of the design role, I know you can't really take away the context of the view shed, but if we look at the design role first, that when you create a plaza like this, that's part of a monument, you do need the three walls. And what you showed with the Lincoln Memorial, you essentially need the three walls, and that's part of what the mesh screen was. So we removed the mesh screen. So now we've got the columns left there. The columns kind of announce still that you're at a memorial monument not just a new park or a new plaza. You're still at a memorial. Now, I don't know with, without really feeling it more of saying, do the columns really still serve that purpose now that the screens are off of them? I'm not sure. But we're about to end up with, I think, just a billboard with some other pieces in front in a park. And I am concerned that, either a monument will work here. There is something to be said that we're honoring a great president, that there will be potentially a column, but it needs to have a function and a reason that is part of or impinges on the view shed. But it's not like we're just building another building. It's a monument to a president that made a difference. And so I'm not, saying that the column is Trajan's column. It's not, I don't know the role of it other than to announce we are now in a monument area. So I think that we're moving the rest of the way down the slope of dismantling the original concept. If we move, I think the columns are important, but I thought that the screens were important too for what they were trying to accomplish. It may be that it can't be accomplished just leaving the columns there, but I think the columns are part of the memorial.
Other comments? Ms. Wright?
I would agree. I think because something is not attached to them does not mean that they don't serve a purpose. You used a really good word. They announce that you are in the presence of something extraordinary, and they demarcate and still play the role of completing the geometry of the temple. I think by their scale, this is where scale and size really does come to the aid of the purpose of this part of the design element. And I also concur with Mr. Wells that we are now starting down, or not starting, we're already mid-slope, of the slippery slope of design by committee. And I urge my colleagues to resist that temptation wholesale.
Chairman. Just a moment, please. Yes. I'm sorry.
I just had a quick clarifying question. I'm struggling to understand the difference between the amendment and what's in the EDR. If it's just consider removing the column, or consider replacing it or moving it in another area. I think that, am I mistaken in that, or is that basically what the EDR suggests, like consider other options to make the right-of-way larger?
Would you like to clarify your motion?
I guess my concern is that the language was way too broad, and it didn't speak to the discomfort I have that the columns serve the intended purpose. And I think my dilemma is protecting the viewshed is our responsibility. It's what Congress intended us to do with our charge at the National Capital Planning Commission. So I was struggling with how do we do that. I don't want to destroy the integrity of the design. I think there are other ways to accomplish it. I mean,
can I just say, I get that
that's
point.
all I meant is
I just don't think that, I'm asking how the amendment clarifies it more.
Because I think it speaks precisely to, well, the columns, because all it says was to think of other ways to enhance the protection of the viewshed. What would that be? To me, that's very mysterious, and so I'm leaving open the option if they can find another way. We were only shown this 2 weeks ago, so it's a preliminary concept, and my concern is if we approve it as it is now, those columns, there will be no more discussion about the columns. They'll be considered sacrosanct.
I guess that's
and I think that's my concern.
I guess that's my point, is what action item do you want the commission to take? I guess, like, do you want them to think more about it? Do you want them to, like, present? I'm confused on what I would be voting on and how it would be different if the only charge we're giving them, again, is to just think about the columns, if that makes sense.
I think the language is really much more of, it's much more of what can be inferred by the language of the commission later down the line. We've got a long way to go, as the chairman talked about. We've got preliminary and final still, and one could infer great specificity in that instruction, which and so that's my objection to it.
Can I add on that? Being both a commissioner and an applicant in many cases, and in this case, but speaking more generally about being an applicant, the things that get noted like this are items that we have to address in the design process going forward, whether it's noted generally or noted very specifically. And unfortunately, the more specific it is, sometimes the more difficult it is to get through that next hurdle. I think that what we all have to keep in mind is that from this review here today, if we go forward with some kind of approval, no matter what the language is, the memorial goes back to the Commission of Fine Arts, and they will have further comments on it as well. And as Mr. Detman suggests, as a result of those comments, or even in the Section 106 discussions, it's quite possible that other modification of the memorial design may occur. And in that process, it's, there may be opportunities to enhance the openness of the viewshed, and that's really what it's all about. It's saying, this still is a matter of concern to the Commission, but, look in this direction in the future. I mean, frankly, I don't feel that this note even needs to be there. I mean, we supported the earlier version of this design and thought that was very strong, and we thought that it preserved the viewshed and enhanced the viewshed. So we were supporting it then, but at this point, I think that the EDR, the way it is written, is sufficient to set the path for the next steps, and then we'll see what happens as the further review occurs.
Mr. Chairman, a couple things. This is very mysterious here. I just doubt whether, I'm not sure that visitors of this location are going to feel they're in a temple, because they got columns on the outside somewhere of it. I mean, you really have to be guided into that concept. I don't think you feel it, but maybe an altar inside would make it more, maybe then you would think you're in a temple or synagogue or a place to but anyhow, that's another. Also, there's been some discussion about this sort of like disassembling this plan piece by piece. Well, given testimony we've received from the public, they may not want to disassemble piece by piece. Some of them don't seem to be very caught up in this to start with. That is, we had a lot of testimony from folks who are saying, we think this may be heading in the wrong direction, period. I'm not going to go that far, because we've been at this a long time, and I think we need to find some way to recognize. I like Ike, he was a great golfer, and I like to play golf. I'm maybe the only person, I'm not sure, I'm a retired colonel in the Army, so I respect his military service, and I want to do that. So I like to see something happen. Also, I think that the purpose of these columns that are going to be left, I can see very functional how they can be used. In protests within the city, somebody's going to find with these young people ways to hang banners from pole to pole, because it's just there as something to hold. It was there to hold something before. We took them down. Now, God, they'll find a way to shimmy up and hang something from them, and we'll have so they'll be functional. Then they will really be around in the temple, and they'll be in there doing what they need to do in the temple. So I think that the amendment that's being offered is a nudge. It's like it's
a reminder.
In multimedia, it's like a poke. We think the poles, these columns, may not have the value they did have before, and why therefore keep them. Because the temple idea is real abstract for me, okay? Maybe to others. The last thing, so I'm kind of leaning towards the amendment. I think it's a good poke. It's a good nudge, and if it doesn't work and we don't like it, then we just can go past it. We've given some wiggle room here. But Peter said sometimes we need a little something to talk about, and maybe if we're right, I don't know. Last thing I want to mention is all these presentations have had these great green foliage trees. Are these trees going to be big and green in the winter? And if not, what are these things going to look like sticking over top of them then? They're not going to be hidden by trees and leaves. They're going to be just there. And again, they'll be functional, but maybe not as we would like to see them in that environment. So I'm speaking sort of in favor of the amendment, And if it doesn't go through and pass, then we move on. But at least we've nudged it. We've raised it as a concern, which I think is legitimate. And if we don't take them down, then they're going to be used by somebody, I think, for banners and hanging things in the future.
I just want to assure everyone that the Park Service and the Park Police will not be allowing people to shimmy up the columns to put things on
Peter,
display.
stop that, Peter, because we see people in Hong Kong and all over this country and this world hanging things in ways. Hanging something is better than doing other stuff that's even much more meaningful. The hanging is, but I understand, Peter, I would not encourage it. I'm just saying it's functional, you know. I would, if I were a park, I would not go around trying to stop hanging a sign. I may be more interested in stopping people from jumping over walls.
I just wanted to return a little bit to your question, because it is true, as people have indicated, that the purpose of these admonition sections of the EDR are to serve as a signal to the designers that when they come back, they need to have addressed these things. And when I first read it, my assumption was, oh, you know, people will talk about limbing up the trees so that they don't spread out so much, or moving the trees back. It doesn't tell me that the challenge is specifically to the designers to look at the placement or lack of placement of the columns there. So I think it's better that we be specific and indicate that, at least for several of us, the columns are a problem. I guess I would also say, with respect to Mina's comment, that it's kind of funny for a site that's this flat that there's a number of slippery slopes involved. I hear your concern about the slippery slope of design by committee, but I mean, that's our job, is to review these projects and to try to balance various concerns, and one of them is to protect the view sheds and the L'Enfant plan, and one is to have something that's appropriate as a commemorative work. But I think in terms of slippery slopes, I find Dr. Feldman's argument compelling, that to say that we are safeguarding the right-of-way and in its of Maryland Avenue and its role in the L'Enfant plan, and then to say we're safeguarding it, but it's okay if you go from 160 to 135. What's the precedent? What's the rationale for 135, and how do we say no to something in the future? I was struck when Mr. Detman said in response to my questions that, well, it's 85% or whatever of the width that it used to be, that, you know, we have two zoning commissioners for the District of Columbia Zoning Commission here, and I know if somebody came before the Zoning Commission and said, yeah, I know the highway plan calls for 130-foot right-of-way here, but, you know, we're proposing 85% of that, it should be okay. Or I know the Height Act says we can only be 20 feet taller than the width of the street in front, but I'm proposing 30 feet, because after all, it's just a little bit of a percentage more. I think 160-foot right-of-way, that's the L'Enfant dimension, that's what we really need to uphold, and I don't see that including a modification to the EDR that specifically directs the designers of the memorial to come back with either a stronger justification or some movement or elimination of the columns. I don't see that impairs the design process of the memorial along lines of your concerns, Mina, and I just think it's more explicit about saying at least what is troubling to some of us, that ask for that to be given a more explicit consideration.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wells.
My understanding was that also in the amendment that what I was responding more to is the consideration. I thought it said the possibility of the elimination of the columns.
Consideration of the possibility of the elimination.
And that's what I'm responding to, is that I do think that Mr. May is correct, that when we speak to things like that, they have to, at some level, take note. And the possibility of the elimination of the columns, whether, you know, it seems that in the overall design, that there's a role of the columns to announce that you are on a monument site, not just a park. And, you know, whether, you know, you look at, and I don't pretend to get into Gary's head at all, but, you know, the degree to which columns are used in Greek and Roman, monuments to their own military generals that very often there's no roof on it, but it still is, a room. They call them temples. But it's the concept that seemed to make sense to me. And so as we now say, well, consider the elimination of the columns, it seems like that's going pretty far. But that's really what I'm speaking to, is that it seems like ultimately we'll end up with a park and a billboard.
If you think about the sandstone columns that used to be in front of the Capitol that are in the Arboretum,
Mm-hmm.
they form something. They say to you, this is not just an isolated smokestack, like this could potentially seem to someone. There are enough of them, and they are in such a clear formation that they convey something. I think we should look at moving, or if not eliminating, giving these columns a role that, I say vestigial with a reason. They were there to hold up a tapestry. There's no tapestry to hold up anymore, but we still have the columns there. And I don't know that that two isolated columns pretty far away from each other and from the tapestry necessarily convey temple. Maybe if they themselves had the tapestry or the banners that otherwise Mr. May's security people will remove, but referring to General Eisenhower, or anyhow, I see them as not having a purpose directly related to the memorial, and when you don't have a purpose directly related to the memorial, it makes it hard to justify putting them into a l'enfant right-of-way.
I also want to comment on the precedent that we're setting. And I think there are two separate issues here to me. We can debate the design and the principles of the temple and this open temple that's being superimposed essentially on a street grid, right? But what I heard read in the EDR and heard from our staff is that, well, it doesn't impact it as bad as the last one did. So to me, that's a huge compromise. So my reluctance to support this EDR, my choices are to put a motion on the table, just remove them, just take them out, or continue to work at it. Is there an alternative? This came up at our last meeting. Could you make them smaller? Could they be a different scale? But to say that those columns are more important than our charge gives me great pause. And I'm not sure, I understand the desire to move this forward. I understand the concern about design by committee, but I would agree with the way you said it. That's our job. And this is not an art piece in a museum. This is a public space. So that's why I wanted more definition. And if we're going to, in the last meeting, disapprove this because we said it violated these principles, and then this meeting say, well, they got to 135 feet, I'm not ready to do that. So that's the spirit behind what I'm trying to put forward, that we keep working with a team, and I give them great kudos for helping to figure it out. I personally disagree with you that back tapestry would be a billboard. I think it would, that's really grown on me, and I think it could be exquisite. I still think you could pull it in. I brought that up last time. I dropped it after going, but that's still a compromise. So put that together, it just overwhelms and overrides what I think is our essential and fundamental responsibility. And hearing Dr. Feldman today just really galvanized it for me. So I'm trying to offer it in the spirit of let's keep working on this. But if we don't define it, I don't think the public understands what our intent is as we move forward. So does that help address the language, or why? The buildings provide the walls. You've got the buildings right there. The landscape can provide the walls. And I think coming from the work that I do in public open space, plazas are really powerful. I don't think you need columns to announce that this is a special place. And as I rode up and down the street today, what catches your attention going down that corridor. It's like, oh my gosh, there's this oasis of green. What's there? And you get there, and there's a spectacular tapestry with a memorial site. So I completely disagree from a design perspective. And I do think that while I know Commissioner Wright often admonishes me not to talk about design, I mean, this is an urban space. It is an urban design issue, and it's about mass and scale. And those columns are still really big, and if you're coming down the street and all you see are those columns, it gets your attention, but is that more important than what we're charged to do? So.
You may, if we can wrap this up.
I have been reminded many times that under the auspices of the CWA, the commission does and should opine about matters of design. So I think it is our job here, and I could not disagree more that the columns have no function, and not just in plan, but rather as in Mr. Wells' terminology, announcing the precinct, but they have a very fundamental function in the creation of this space. I would suggest more of them along that northern line might have helped you and all of us understand their function. It is a compromise. Yes, it's a compromise. I have voted for the February 12, I guess it was, design, and following with the April design. This is a compromise. This is designed by committee. I accept that. But if you put language in this, this amendment fundamentally changes the concept, because the concept is dependent upon this particular geometry for its success. So I would say that if you are going to, you should just vote against the concept and disapprove the design because that's what we would be doing by removing the columns. It's not the same concept. I object vehemently to the word vestigial. The Planet of the Apes conversation was much repeated in the press for reasons that are pretty obvious. It's a very colorful remark, but it is not I don't think it's a fair one, because, again, because the columns are not attached to something does not mean they don't have a function. They have a very important function in this design. I could go on. The making decisions for fear of precedent setting seems to me the most bureaucratic of reasons to make a decision. And I don't believe that it is a precedent that has not been set before. That doesn't mean that you should do it, that just because somebody else already has. But I think we've explored so many iterations of this fundamental concept. And again, I think the concept is sound. I think the scale is appropriate. I think the scale is necessary to articulate the concept. So I would ask you, and go back to the notion of if you feel that strongly about removing the columns or compelling the design team to consider removing them, then you're fundamentally changing the concept, and you should just vote to disapprove. Because we are at concept, believe it or not, even though what's before us is well beyond 35% design, and there are lots of good reasons for that. We're still faced with making a decision about the concept. And those two columns, freestanding, functional columns, are integral to the concept. So I would not support your amendment.
Mr. Miller.
Respectfully.
I would agree with what Commissioner Wright had to say. I would also add that at one point there were more columns in this design. This is, you know, as it's been slowly altered and reduced. I think actually we should go back to the EDR and think about what that suggestion really means. And what it does, I think, is that it puts the design of the memorial as it continues to develop in the hands of the designer. And it means that it's not us making decisions like this. A key decision like removing the columns at this point, I think, is not really what we should be doing at this point. I think that we need to vote the concept up or down. We can encourage them to push it in particular directions, but I would not give such specific direction as to look at elimination of the column. I think it's their, you know, they got the message here today. I think that it's their design to develop.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As many of you know, I've never liked those columns from the beginning. For the third time, I'll say they're the biggest, baddest bollards in the city. They will be. I always thought their size was just gargantuan, and their heaviness was just. And I, from the beginning, I'd asked the architectural team, could there be another material, a metallic material that Mr. Gary is famous for using in very beautiful, creative ways that could be used to hold up the tapestries, and now for these two that are going to be freestanding. I mean, I realize that there is a reduction from, what was it, 12 to 10 columns. There was 12 columns in the original.
I'm sorry, dimension. I don't know what.
Oh, right. There was a reduction in the size of the diameter of the columns from 12 feet to 10 feet. There may be even been a reduction in the height from 86 or something to 80. But it's still huge. They're still huge. And I worry about not just the view shed on the Maryland Avenue, but the view just looking up Independence Avenue or down Independence Avenue and seeing that thing there in the winter, especially. So I would maybe, in order to gain some more support for this substitute amendment, maybe we should add the word, in addition to removal or relocation you had there, and considering removal or relocation of the columns, maybe redesign, because you said maybe make them smaller, maybe use a different material. So if that would help, it won't help Commissioner May, who doesn't think we should be giving design direction to the designer. That's the only suggestion I would make. But I totally associate myself with remarks of Commissioner White and Commissioner McCarthy and Commissioner Dixon on the columns. But I'm ready to move forward.
Sensing no further comment, it's been moved and seconded. Instead of just having a voice vote, let's do a show of hands. All in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see 4? All opposed to the amendment, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With 2 abstentions? 2 abstentions. So the amendment fails on a 4 to 5 vote. So now we're back to the EDR and the motion that's before us, and I think we probably have further discussion on the overall design. Sensing no further discussion, it's been moved and seconded. Once again, the matter before us, all in favor of the EDR as it is before you, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All opposed, raise your hand. 1. The EDR passes on a vote of 10 to 1. Thank you, Mr. Detman.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. May.
I would like to bring another matter before the commission, which is a reconsideration of the vote to exclude the support facility from the design of the memorial. So I guess I should move for a reconsideration. Is that the right step? So I would move for reconsideration and ask for a second.
Move for
Reconsideration, the removal of the support building, the decision to remove the support.
Mr. Chairman, I think you have to be on either the prevailing side. No necessarily.
I'll explain the difference.
No, we've already.
Okay.
Right.
This is
Okay.
This is a motion to rescind.
Rescind.
A motion to rescind
Right.
is subject to debate. But a motion to rescind, if it was not previously announced in writing or verbally at the previous meeting, requires a 2/3 vote. In this case, as opposed to a simple majority if it were noticed prior. In this case, there are 11 members, and so for this motion to pass, it needs 7 votes. Correct, Mr. May?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, and I made it as a motion, so I'd ask for a second, and then I can explain our reasons.
Second. It's been moved and seconded, so the matter's before you, Mr. May.
Thank you. So, this matter was brought up, I think, rather hastily at the April meeting as an add-on to the decision not to approve the grant preliminary approval to the memorial. And I don't believe that there was a really robust debate at that time, and I think that many of the commissioners who were not here through the entire process didn't necessarily appreciate our reasons why that building is necessary in the context of this design. It is a matter that came up before the commission a long time ago and was considered, and the commission has granted tacit approval for it. First of all, this memorial is not a small memorial. It is a presidential memorial. Every other presidential memorial has visitor services on site, either within the memorial itself or within an auxiliary building. And it's very important for us to provide the full range of services that are necessary. It includes education and interpretation through the visitor contact station. In other words, a ranger will have a place to be in an indoor environment. Includes a bookstore, which is a nonprofit operation. This is not, a place to buy trinkets. This is a place to learn more about Eisenhower. Our rangers are able, because they are stationed there, able to give a better visitor experience through program talks, guided tours, etc. Now, they don't actually have to be there. They could be brought in by vehicle, or they could be conceivably in another building nearby, but it is very important that the rangers be there, and that's one of the reasons why we have this facility. Restroom facilities are also a very important thing. We expect to have 1 million visitors a year, and we expect to have visitors well into the evening, well past when any neighboring buildings, including the museums, would be available for restrooms and such. Not to mention the fact that the Smithsonian doesn't particularly care for us sending people across the street to use their restrooms. The facility also provides necessary support for maintenance, and that includes some storage and other space in the lower level, but it also includes necessary support for the mechanical systems that are necessary to operate the entire facility. Not being able to have the rangers or the maintenance support on site means more vehicles to the site, more vehicles parking on the site, trucks having to park on the site, and so on. The excuse me. Now, the fact of this support facility was addressed by NCPC and the National Park Service during site selection, and as was mentioned earlier, the NCPC's finding of no significant impact and decision on this with regard to site noted that there would be a building of no greater than 2,500 square feet. This is 2,400 square feet footprint. So the issue was taken up before. The issue was taken up before also the question of whether these services could be provided in adjacent space in the Department of Education building or some other nearby space. That has its own complications. We do that now with the White House Visitor Center. We pay a lot of money to rent that space, and everybody who walks in that door gets airport-level security screening to go in. with our small visitors contact station, when you need to use the restroom, you don't need to get frisked and go through x-rays and magnetometers and things like that. Any building in that area where we'd have to do that, you'd have to go through that kind of experience. It's simply not the kind of thing that we want to subject people to. Not to mention the fact that the buildings, we've not been able to get support from GSA or Department of Education or anybody else for the idea of actually putting these facilities into those buildings. Excuse me. Now, I agree that it's desirable in the abstract not to have unnecessary structures or unnecessary, I don't know, buildings of this sort within a public square like this, but unfortunately the reality interferes. It's necessary for us to have these services, this place for people on site, and it is simply not practical for us to do it in another building. I personally, I wasn't here in 2006 when the site selection FONSI was done, but when I got involved in this memorial, I was asking many of the same questions. Why can't we put this in a neighboring building? And we did investigate it, and I became convinced that there really was no other choice than to have this building out here. So it's really, practically speaking, the only thing that the only choice that we have. I would ask if anybody has any questions. Superintendent Bob Vogel is here and is prepared to answer any questions about the necessity of this facility. So,
Sure, there's a motion on the motion.
There was moved and seconded.
Been moved and seconded, yes. Mr. Miller.
I understand the need to have these kind of visitor services on site, but I think they should be in the adjacent Lyndon B. Johnson Education Building, which conveniently can be used to educate people about Eisenhower with the visitor services that would be there. I don't understand why the federal government can't figure out how to activate ground floor federal buildings all up and down that don't impact on the security or have a different type of security than the building might otherwise need. That's been a real problem. The deadness of ground floor space that the federal government owns and occupies in the monumental core. And this commission is on record of wanting those spaces to be activated. So, I mean, I didn't support the motion to eliminate the information, the visitor building, because I was asking, well, are you saying to relocate it to the adjacent building? And the maker of the motion said no. So I saw the need to have that type of services right there nearby. But why is this motion necessary? This EDR that we just approved by a 10-to-1 vote has the information center on this project site. So
I've been advised by the commission staff that because it was voted on previously to remove it, that we needed to rescind that earlier decision. And I think that what's in the EDR is simply noting that it's there, contrary to the direction of the commission. I would say, Commissioner Miller, I agree with you on almost all that you had to say. I mean, I agree that federal buildings should be activated and that there should be ground floor retail, and you shouldn't have to go through x-rays and magnetometers. But the burden for the current situation with federal buildings shouldn't fall on this memorial and our ability to care for our visitors and to provide an appropriate memorial. I mean, I would love it if this could go into another building practically, but practically speaking, it can't. The reality intrudes. And so, it has to be what it is.
I would also second your remarks. I mean, the LBJ building, the floor plate of the LBJ building is particularly given to the possibility of creating a pedestrian throughway. It's because of its era. That's how these buildings, these mega block buildings, were intended to have a very transparent ground floor. But operations, from an operations standpoint, the Park Service requirements for a facility to, I think that you need equipment storage and all of that stuff, and that doesn't certainly accomplish the activation of the ground floor of the DOED. I mean, but I agree with you. We're trying to do it at the GSA headquarters buildings with the addition of retail on E Street facing Rollins Park. So it is something that we're very interested in by setting an example, leading other agencies to do. But it does have complications, security not least among them. So there's two sides to the reasons in this case that we agree with the Park Service that it's in this case at this site, it's not feasible at this time.
Mr. Chairman, it seems kind of odd to me that there be much discussion because we already approved something which almost implies in it that this would be here. So it's like we already kind of bought into it a little bit. Secondly, I think anything we can do to enhance the quality of visitors coming into our town is revenue for the city in a very parochial concern, and it's convenience for them. So I think and does it fit into the plan that we were talking about with the pillows and the columns and all that? Well, then I think it's a no-brainer, but maybe there's more discussion necessary.
Is there further discussion? Ms. White?
I just have a comment and a question. And again, being an open space advocate for me, anytime you can avoid putting a building in a public space, do it. And I guess because this decision was made so long ago, and I remember the motion, and I appreciate the background that you just shared with us, maybe it would be helpful to revisit and look at it from the flip side of not burdening this project with solving it, but maybe using this project as an opportunity to encourage further exploration. In the same way the last EDR passed with continue to explore ways to further enhance the openness, maybe put it back in and continue the Park Service to further explore the possibilities of putting it in the first floor. Unless the Department of Education has told you flat out no, is there any harm in, yes, we acknowledge we need visitor services on site. The preference is to put them in adjacent buildings and to revisit that and come back and tell us if it's feasible. But since I've been on the commission in 2 years, we haven't talked about what those have been. Is that a reasonable?
Well, I would be very happy to ask the question again more explicitly of the Department of Ed. We have asked it before, and we've gotten it, I guess, more or less informally. And I have no problem with that. Again, I think that generally speaking, the Park Service doesn't want to build more buildings than we have to have.
Yeah, exactly.
So we undertake this sort of thing very reluctantly. And this is not the first memorial, which we started out thinking that, well, put a memorial on this site and, we can do it without restrooms and so on. But inevitably, well, in the couple of cases that I can recall, what we discover in the process of understanding exactly what putting a specific memorial on the site means, it dictates having these kinds of services. So we had this extensive debate at the Martin Luther King Memorial, and I can tell you that facility gets a lot of use.
But it's on the mall, and you don't have an opportunity. So that's all I'm saying.
I
think we could further
many people argued that we had FDR a short distance away, and we had World War II a short distance.
This is right at the building. So I think this is a different situation, I think it would help to do further exploration, especially since this was decided in 2006. And it's 2014. Maybe there's more openness to it.
It's been done more recently than 2006, but not formally. So, again, I'm happy to investigate again with the Department of Education and report back to the Commission on what we find.
Well, I would support putting it back in if that was the intent, to further explore ways to further. Explore ways, is that a possibility? Revisit it again.
Explore the potential relocation of that facility into the adjacent building.
Excuse me.
Commissioner Miller said we always, I'm sorry, I just want to make one last point, that we ask federal agencies to activate their first floor. So at least let's explore it.
Okay, this is step one. You have to rescind the vote that you previously took to remove the ranger station.
Step 2, you have to vote to put it back in. Step 3, you have to vote an amended EDR. It's unfortunate that this conversation didn't take place before you voted on the EDR.
We'd have to bring the EDR back before us.
And you have to rescind, vote to include, and then vote to amend the EDR to include.
Can we do that?
Can we roll that up into a single vote?
How do we do that?
No.
Can we roll the second two into a single
No.
vote?
Okay.
All right, well.
Sorry, Rod.
So your motion's on the table, right?
My motion's on the table.
Motion to rescind is
Rescind.
on the table. Last comment, Ms.
This is actually a question for Commissioner Wright. When I look at page 30 of the Eisenhower Memorial brochure and look at what we can see there of the first floor of the LBJ building, it's got those typical brutalist sort of columns in the front and then some recessed area behind that. I can't say as I've ever had a reason to go to the U.S. Department of Education building, so, but is there sufficient space within that overhang that one could construct visitor facilities without having to deal with all of the GSA security issues about going through the front door, or is that just a very shallow?
Are you talking about this?
Right.
I finally refer to that as the pit. It now serves the DOE's cafeteria for outdoor seating. It is, I think, addressed with some, Craig, would you like to talk about how the design?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily have to be that side of the building. I'm assuming, given the style of architecture that it is consistently, those columns consistently march all the way across, and presumably there's an overhang and maybe there's space on the other side. I just don't know what that space is like, how deep it is, and whether that's
about the underground, undergrade space?
No, she's talking about the arcade.
Right, the arcade, thank you. Yeah.
So,
Page 17 has the plan.
Well, you got me on that.
I don't know that there's enough space. But
I don't know that it's, I'm just trying to think, I would imagine you're talking about a column bay that is not more than 18 feet, I don't know.
Can I just mention?
It's not
typically
deep.
It's going to be a problem if you are under the building. The same reason why there are issues with parking under federal office buildings. Anything that's going to be under a portion of the building is going to wind up having to go through the same sort of security features. It doesn't really matter whether it's extra space or not. It's still going to pose the same sort of problems operationally for us.
Undergrade.
Anything under a portion of the building. If it's under the overhang of the building in the arcade space, it's still going to be a security concern.
Well, and that brings up a whole host of other design issues having to do with mid-century modern, and what these spaces are very important to the design integrity, and this is has been determined eligible for the National Register. So it opens up a whole can of worms there, if you'd like to.
But in DC, we used to give, in the zoning regulations at that period of time, we went so far as to give density bonuses for people to create these lovely arcades, and several years later we realized, boy, that was a mistake, just totally deadens the street. So we've allowed people to fill them in, and people have come up with design solutions that are attractive and appropriate. So I don't think that's in and of itself a difficulty. I think the issue of progressive collapse, or, I was thinking about how USDOT put the Starbucks that wasn't part of the integral portion of the building, but I realize it's because it was pulled out, not within the arcade. So anyhow, maybe it just strengthens Commissioner White's suggestion that we talk about exploring and look at all of those issues.
And what prompted me is just on page 17 where it talks about the building and it says education branding, education art display area. Just exploring one more time. I'd be happy to support rescinding the vote, putting it back in, but.
The matter before us is the motion to rescind only. Sensing we're ready to vote on that. All in favor of rescinding that, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
One no, it's Mr. Miller. Now the matter before us.
Now I need to make a motion to reinstate the visitor contact station as shown in the design.
Seconded.
That's been moved and seconded. I presume there's not a whole lot of discussion on that. All in favor of reinserting the visitors center, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. It's unanimous. I'm sorry, one abstention, two abstentions.
Okay. So now I'd like to make a motion that the EDR be amended to reflect the reinsertion.
Precision and reinsertion.
Of the visitor contact station, and I would not object to a note included in that, much like you have notes in the EDR now, that would encourage the Park Service to explore locating those services within adjacent buildings.
And I have a parliamentary question. Since the matter the EDR has been voted on and passed, do we not need a motion to reconsider to put it back before us? Yes. So that would be the first motion. I mean, it's not before us now.
No,
She can't.
she can't move because she voted against.
So I
Oh,
would
you're
move,
right.
move
You're right. I'm
reconsideration
sorry.
of the EDR.
Having voted on the prevailing side, you move to reconsider the
Reconsider
vote
the
by
EDR.
which we passed the EDR. Is there a second to that?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of that, say aye. It's procedural. Aye. Opposed, no. The matter's back before us.
So I would move that the EDR be modified to reflect the reinsertion of the visitor contact station, noting that the Park Service will continue to explore whether such services could be relocated into adjacent buildings.
It's been moved and seconded that the EDR as now amended, this is the full big EDR as amended, to approve preliminary approval site and building plans as amended is before us. Any questions? All in favor of the EDR as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
One.
And please mark me as an abstention.
Mr. Wells is an abstention. Ms. White is a no. Everyone else is in favor. Okay. We are done. We are done on that item.
Did you get it? Good.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make mention of just a matter of fact, I'm the Executive Director of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. There were serious allegations.
State your name, please.
Carl Riddell. There were serious allegations made about the Commission, its performance on the basis of a staff report from the House Natural Resources Committee. Those allegations were serious enough that the Commission responded to all the members individually of that committee, pointing out errors of fact. And I know this was being entertained, as I understood it, as matters of fact. So I would like to suggest that we'd make available our response to the members of the Natural Resources Committee and anyone that wished to have us address any of this. But there were multiple errors and flawed matters of report, and it should be put in the record that that should be addressed from my viewpoint. Thank
We
you.
would be happy to receive that information and put it as part of the official record.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is agenda item number 5B.
I'm so glad you were here.
And it is the Constitution Gardens rehabilitation, and we have Ms. Hirsch. Ms. Hirsch, welcome. We're on the Constitution Gardens rehabilitation. We have Ms. Hirsch. You're on.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The National Park Service has submitted concept plans for the rehabilitation of Constitution Gardens for your comments. Constitution Gardens is located along the National Mall between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. It's the area that you see outlined here in red. It's bordered on the north by Constitution Avenue, to the east by 17th Street, and on the south, the reflecting pool of the Lincoln Memorial. To the west is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So though what you see today on the site of Constitution Gardens is a reflection of a design that dates to the 1970s, the history of the site extends back to the 19th century. Originally, the site was part of the Potomac River and the flats, and essentially was created from the dredging of the river. Shortly after the dredging was completed, the area was dedicated as parkland and also acknowledged in the designs of the McMillan Plan. During the 19th century, during the early 20th century, the Navy constructed temporary buildings on the site, and those stayed in place until the 1970s. The design for Constitution Gardens was put forward by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill in the 1970s, and the garden was developed to celebrate the nation's bicentennial. It was intended to provide a pastoral setting and provide opportunities for recreation and event use. In the 1980s, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was added on the west side of the site, and then a few years later, the memorial to the Declaration of Independence signers was added to the island in the center of the lake. More recently, in 2010, the National Park Service, along with this commission, adopted the National Mall Plan, which lays out an overall rehabilitation plan for the entire National Mall, includes a vision for Constitution Gardens as a relaxing destination with opportunities for entertainment and recreation. After adoption of that National Mall Plan, the NPS has been working with their partner, the Trust for the National Mall. The Trust managed a design competition for Constitution Gardens, which resulted in the selection of Peter Walker Partners Landscape Architecture and Rogers Architects for the Constitution Gardens site. So, as I noted, Constitution Gardens was designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill in the 1970s. They worked closely with Dan Kiley, a well-known modern landscape architect. A central feature of the gardens is the lake, which features a curving shoreline. There are about 2 miles of walkways within the gardens. One walkway primarily follows the shoreline of the lake, while the other one curves around the western knoll that you see in the upper right here. And then there are also secondary walkways that branch off of those 2 primary pathways. There are thousands of trees in the park, all of varying condition and health. They're fairly regularly planted along the perimeter to help define the edge of the park. The area was intended to have a different character from the rest of the formality of the rest of the mall, and was intended to be a pleasant place to walk between the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial. Since opening, the condition of the park has declined substantially, and it has never quite achieved the success of a grand public space along the National Mall. The water quality is very poor, as the lake is very shallow, and it was constructed without any kind of water filtration system, and so often you have algae that accumulates on the surface. In addition, the soil condition is fairly poor. It's kept many of the trees from reaching full maturity, and many of the walkways have deteriorated over the years. Due to the poor physical conditions of the site, the Constitution Gardens is a fairly underutilized area of the mall, and the visitor experience can be sometimes lacking. So based on the recommendations in the mall plan, the Park Service has been working with the Trust to develop overall goals for the project at Constitution Gardens, and just to quickly review what those are, is to improve the water quality of the lake and seek alternative water sources for it, to improve the growing conditions on the site, and also to diversify the plant community and vegetation that is found there. The other goal is to reestablish the original idea in the 1970s plan was to include a pavilion that was eliminated for cost constraints back in the 1970s, and so the plan before you today includes a proposal to place a pavilion back in the park. And then finally, to enhance the circulation in the park and to surrounding memorials along the National Mall. So with these project goals in mind, the Park Service and the Trust have developed 3 alternatives. I'll quickly review all 3, focusing on what is essentially becoming the preferred alternative. Alternative 1 conceives of Constitution Gardens as a sustainable landscape and improves upon the ecology of the site. The primary elements of the project include, as I noted, a pavilion on the east end of the lake. This would be a pavilion with a more limited basement area. Garden walls are proposed along the Constitution Avenue as well as 17th Street. And those walls would be about 30 inches of height. And in addition, the topography adjacent to Constitution Avenue would be amplified with berms. Service access to that pavilion would be on the garden paths. The lockkeeper's house at the corner of Constitution and 17th would be slightly relocated to the southwest. And then at the east end of the lake, a new lake ring would be inserted, and that would also include about a 20,000 square foot ice skating rink. On the perimeter of the lake, there would be a new plant life or aquatic life to introduce a wetland edge. And then the existing concession stand that's on the western side of the park would be removed. And then the planting plan would focus on a variety of trees, maintaining as many healthy and large trees that are on the site as possible. So alternative 2 focuses on improving the access and visitor services to the site in order to provide a variety of flexible spaces for recreational opportunities. And while there's similarities to alternative 1, there are a few differences to highlight. The pavilion on the east end of the lake would be larger and have a more substantial basement area. The perimeter wall that's proposed for Constitution and 17th would be lower. It would be approximately 18 inches in height. And again, the topography along Constitution and 17th would be amplified a bit. Access to that pavilion would be below grade and access from a driveway off of 17th Street. The lockkeeper's house is proposed to be moved a further distance away, probably about 500 feet to the west. And then the ice or the lake ring that's proposed for the east end of the lake would feature a much larger ice skating rink. And then the existing concession stand that's on the west side of the park would be retained and adaptively reused. No wetland edge would be included with this alternative. And then the emphasis of the planting plan would be on establishing open meadows or larger lawn areas so that people could gather for social interactions. And then the third alternative, which is being called a hybrid alternative that's integrated and sustainable park, essentially combines elements of both alternatives 1 and 2 to maximize sustainability strategies to provide improvements for visitors in activating the park. So the features that would be included would be the larger pavilion with the larger basement area on the east end of the lake. The service access would be from 17th Street through a new driveway. The perimeter walls that would be added along Constitution and 17th would be of the lower height, 18 inches. The topography would be still amplified, but to a slightly lower height than what is proposed in either of the 2 previous alternatives. The lockkeeper's house would be shifted slightly to the southwest. The lake ring would include the smaller ice skating rink. This alternative would include the wetland option to help improve the water quality of the lake. The lake would also be excavated and deepened in order to improve water circulation and allow for colder temperatures. And the existing concession stand would be removed as part of this alternative. And then as far as the planting plan, it would be a combination of open lawn areas along with preserving as many healthy and larger trees on site as possible. So just to go into a little more detail about what would be included in the hybrid alternative, staff is recommending that the Commission comment favorably on this alternative. These sections give you an idea of how the existing topography would be modified to create berms along Constitution Avenue. These berms would help improve the soil conditions, but also provide a sense of enclosure to the park and keep the noise and traffic along Constitution at bay. Under the hybrid alternative, the relative height of these berms is about 6.5 feet, and so it's less than what was proposed under alternative 1, which is about 10 feet. So one of the primary focuses of the project is to remediate the soil and improve the condition on the site in order to allow the trees and vegetation to fully mature. But another important component is to improve the circulation throughout the site. And so a series of dual entries from Constitution Avenue would be established to emphasize the entry points. The existing entries would be widened to about 80 feet and would include two 15-foot wide paths with low plantings between them. So here, with this rendering, you get a view from Constitution Avenue looking towards the garden, and you get a sense of what form those entries would take, as well as the low seat wall that is proposed. You can also start to get a sense of how the topography would be modified slightly on the left-hand side of the slide, and in the distance you can see the new pavilion in the background. With respect to the treatment of the lock keeper's house, as I mentioned, it would be moved about 40 feet to the southwest of its current location. From this diagram, you can see it has already been moved once. The dashed line on the right shows its original location. It was moved in the early part of the 20th century. Relocating the building again will help to it to receive the necessary preservation treatment that it requires for its reuse, and then it's proposed to be reused for visitor information, educational purposes, and also possibly donor recognition. Along with the relocation of the lock keeper's house, a new entry plaza is proposed for the corner of Constitution and 17th. The proposal also includes modifications to the corner in order to allow two buses to be able to turn at the same time on this corner. The location for the lock keeper's house is preferred under the hybrid alternative, as it keeps the building closer to its historic location, and so it's a preferred preservation approach than moving it 500 feet to the west. This rendering gives a view towards the new entry plaza as well as the new location of the lock keeper's house, and how it also starts to give you a better sense of how the landscape would be amplified up and away from Constitution Avenue. And in the distance, again, you can start to see the edge of the new pavilion that would be built at the east end of the lake. As was originally proposed, as I mentioned in the SOM plan, this plan includes a pavilion at the east end of the lake. The pavilion would act as a threshold and allow visitors to navigate the various levels of the garden. You'd be able to gain access to the lake, but also the pavilion would serve as a lookout point for the surrounding memorials and monuments. And the idea is that this pavilion would be a flexible structure that can be used for a variety of activities, for people who are visiting the park looking to grab a bite to eat, or who are out enjoying a walk in the afternoon. They can take in the view of the lake or rent equipment to enjoy some of the activities on the new lake ring. So with the construction of the World War II memorial to the south, this pavilion has been shifted slightly to the west of where it was originally planned with the SLM plan in the 1970s. This will allow the views towards the World War II memorial to remain open, as well as the pathway that brings visitors from Constitution Avenue down to the memorial. As I mentioned, this pavilion would have a larger basement area in order to accommodate the servicing of the building, and the loading access would be from 17th Street. So this rendering just shows the pathway from Constitution Avenue as you'd be walking towards the World War II memorial, and you can see the pavilion structure through the trees on the right. The pavilion would feature a restaurant, as you can see on the right-hand side, an observatory deck on its upper level with a stairway that will lead one down to the lake. The pavilion is primarily an open or shade structure, with the majority of the enclosed space for the proposed restaurant. The lower level will feature a snack bar, bookstore, seasonal recreational rentals, and public restrooms. Directly adjacent to the pavilion, as you can see in the rendering, would be a larger event terrace or plaza that will be available for informal gatherings. And then this rendering just gives you a sense of walking down the stairs towards the lake once you've entered the structure. It gives you also a better idea of how the structure has been conceived of as an open, airy building, and that it would be fairly easy to gain access to the lake. Then this view is if you were standing down adjacent to the lake looking back up towards the pavilion structure. As far as improvements to visitor services, a new lake ring, as I mentioned, would be added on the east end near the new pavilion. The idea is that the lake ring will be used for model boating and fishing in the spring and summer months, and then in the colder months it could be used for ice skating. The idea is to increase the variety of activities in the park both throughout the year but also from the daytime hours throughout the evening. The project is proposed to be phased with the focus of phase 1 on the northeast corner of the site at 17th and Constitution, and that's primarily to focus on the upcoming celebration of the Park Service's 100th year anniversary. So phase 1 would include the relocation of the Lockkeeper's House, the new entry plaza at Constitution and 17th, the new event terrace, and associated landscape improvements, including the construction of the low garden wall. Phase 2 would include the remaining components, the construction of the pavilion, improvements to the lake, the remaining improvements to the circulation system, and then any other landscape improvements. So as far as analysis, staff focused on the project's conformance to both the National Mall Plan and the federal elements of the comprehensive plan. The project responds to the objectives in the Mall Plan to maintain the original vision of Constitution Gardens as a symbolic landscape, while also creating a destination that is accessible, flexible, and sustainable. The project also conforms to several policies in the federal elements of the comp plan, including the environment, the parks and open space, the preservation element, as well as the visitors element. So staff is recommending that the Commission strongly support the project and the Park Service's efforts to work with the Trust to improve the condition of Constitution Gardens. Of issues of concern to staff, the first had to do with views. The Park Service and the Trust have taken into account the comments the Commission provided back in 2012 during an information presentation, which had to do with the impacts associated with the amplification of the topography. As I said, the average height will be about 6.5 feet, and so there's still some potential to alter the views or block views towards the gardens as well as from within the gardens out towards Constitution Avenue. The buildings along Constitution Avenue, including the American Pharmacists Association and National Academy of Sciences, all help to establish the setting for the garden, and so as the project moves forward, it's important to consider these views. The other primary topic of concern relates to the service driveway and the curb modifications at Constitution and 17th. Staff supports the underground location to avoid and minimize any conflicts with pedestrians, but notes that additional work is still required on the design to minimize the impact on the landscape. The project proposes, as I said, to modify the curb, and while staff recognizes the need to address the congestion at the intersection and accommodate tour buses, the experience of the pedestrian and pedestrian safety should be prioritized over vehicles. It's very early in the process, and so I think there should be ample time to work out the design issues, and staff is recommending that the Park Service also coordinate with the District Department of Transportation. Staff is supportive of the proposed pavilion at the east end of the lake and feels the structure has been sited in a sensitive manner to maximize the views towards the World War II memorial. The design of the structure is still evolving, but it seems to integrate well with the surrounding landscape, and the mass, scale, and height seem appropriate for Constitution Gardens. Staff anticipates further discussion on the design and lighting through the Section 106 consultation process, and is therefore recommending that the Commission request additional simulations to understand the impacts the structure may have on surrounding view sheds, and also including towards the World War II memorial and other vantage points along the mall. So overall, staff is very supportive of the project, particularly the hybrid alternative, as it combines sustainability strategies to improve the ecology of the park, while also creating a vibrant park space along the National Mall. Staff wanted to note that CFA recently reviewed the project. You should have a copy of the letter that CFA wrote at your desk. In general, CFA was supportive of the project and its goals to rehabilitate the landscape. CFA did raise a few issues that are similar to the same issues staff is raising in terms of the service driveway and the curb modifications at Constitution and 17th. But overall, CFA commended the design and noted how they would like to see the project be fully implemented as soon as possible. And so the executive director's recommendation is for the commission to provide the following comments: to strongly support the project and the Park Service's efforts to partner with the trust to improve the condition of Constitution Gardens, to note that the project is consistent with the recommendations in the National Mall Plan, and to establish a pleasant environment within Constitution Gardens that accommodates a variety of activities, to comment favorably on the hybrid alternative that combines ecological functions with vibrant social spaces to create an accessible, flexible, and sustainable park. To note that the concept for the pavilion at the east end of the park seems to be of an appropriate mass, scale, and height for Constitution Gardens. To recommend that the Park Service coordinate with the district's Department of Transportation on the design and location of the proposed pavilion service entrance at 17th and the modifications to the curb radius. And then finally, to request additional simulations of the surrounding views and vistas, both to and from the park, in order to understand the implications of the proposed changes to the topography and the new walls on Constitution and 17th, and then also the impacts that the pavilion design and lighting will have on the surrounding view sheds. And that concludes my presentation. There are also members of the design team here available to answer any questions.
Thank you. I was going to ask, is it Rogers or Marvel who is the?
It's Rogers.
It's Rogers. Okay, good.
Mr. Chairman, I move for vote, at least.
Second.
Discussion in.
It's been moved and seconded, and the matter is now before us. Further discussion. It's a very important project. It's been a long time in the making, and this is concept.
Sure, I just want to make one suggestion. Maybe on the slides, if you could have directional stuff at the top. Even as well as I know the area, sometimes I wasn't sure I was looking north, south, east, and west. Yeah, because it's kind of hard, but great presentation, though. Very much so.
Yeah, I would just echo the favorable comments. It's a very exciting project, and hope it moves forward as quickly as possible, and commend everybody who's worked on it.
Yep. Other comments? Hearing none, has been Mr. Wells.
Just a quick question. If you summarize what the goal of and purpose of this property is it to provide a park? I mean, is that, or what is the primary goal for this?
I think it's to provide a park space that's pleasant to walk through as you're visiting the monuments along the mall, and a space that, you know, visitors and residents can enjoy the amenities that are provided.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question about the can we see a plan that shows the page 16, the lake ring? Did you say people fish in here?
They do now, yes.
How deep is it?
Don't need much
Right
depth,
now, it's not very deep at all, is my understanding, and the plan is to excavate it.
3 feet.
Right now, it's about 3 feet deep, and the plan is to excavate it to anywhere from, I think it's that deep to 10 feet.
Wow.
Okay,
It's stocked for the fishing.
a little programming note. Are you going to stock this thing?
I believe the Park Service stocks it now.
We do it now.
You do? With what?
I think maybe somebody for the park would want to answer how it works right now.
It's your choice.
So approaching, come on up, come all the way up. You got to be on the microphone.
Well, I mean, I have a reason for asking.
Sure. Well, and I want to give you accurate information. So this is
I could fall on hard times.
Sure. So, this is Sean Keneally, is the Chief of Professional Services for the National Mall Memorial Parks.
Good afternoon. So there's a variety of fish in the lake. There's bass, there's crappie, there's bluegill, sunfish, and catfish.
Wow.
Okay, so, and then my next question is, so what happens to the fish when you, I assume you're going to put some mechanical systems in for the ice rink because we're not going to depend just on the weather.
That's correct.
And so am I reading this? I know this is a dumb question, but I'm curious.
Frozen fish. That's
Right.
what I'm worried about, right?
Well, I'm very concerned.
But
I'm very happy you're concerned about the fish because we are too.
Yeah, well, I mean, so how does this work?
So what will
have
happen?
An isolation
Sure.
tank?
Well, what will happen if you put a picture up of the lake? So the fish will actually be removed when we do the renovation or the rehabilitation of the project. So we've removed the fish before in the past. We've had a number of events out there where we've had some fish kills where we have actually had to drain the lake and remove the fish that were remaining, and we work closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service to do that. So that's not really an issue. That's something that we can easily overcome. And then what will happen is where you see the lake ring, where the red arrow is, that's going to be a much shallower water feature where we'll not have fish. So the fish, when the lake is rehabilitated, will have in the deeper sections, where outside of the lake ring, that's where the fish and the other aquatic life will reside.
So will this? My question really is not about the fish, but will the ring, the winter ring, be visible all year round? So yes?
There will be about a 10 to 12 foot path around the ring that will allow visitors to either fish to the west from the ring.
See, I didn't get that.
Or during the summer months, they'll be able to use model boating, rent model boats around the ring itself for the summer months. And then in the winter months, it'll be closed.
I missed that. Thank you. I'm
And then
glad
we'll
I
allow ice
asked.
skating.
That's even better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Flexible space.
Cool. We've got some, tanks, extra tanks in the Department of Commerce.
We'll take you up on that. Are there any other questions?
Thank you very much. Other questions before a vote?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to comment. It's a pleasure to have a relatively non-controversial project that everybody seems to like.
Let's get the vote first.
I can see where it's going. So.
Okay, the matter before has been properly moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Opposed, no. Passes. Thank you, Ms. Hirsch, and thank you to the Park Service. One more item before us. Agenda item number 5, Agenda item number 5C is the draft master plan for the Naval Research Laboratory. Mr. Wheel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, this is a draft master plan submission by the U.S. Department of the Navy for their facility, the Naval Research Laboratory, which is located in East Washington, D.C. The master plan is being submitted for review and comment by the Commission. So the master plan is founded on a number of planning principles that you see on the screen before you, as well as a vision statement to integrate premier facilities within a historic framework to create a campus that serves as the principal Navy activity center for research, development, testing, and evaluation in a safe, secure, and sustainable environment. Based on this vision statement and these planning principles, the Navy developed a number of long-term framework strategy overlays, and those were used to inform the short-term master plan development program, which consists of both funded and likely to be funded projects over the next 5 years. So the submission itself consists of the master plan document as well as a supporting transportation management plan. So the installation itself is located along the eastern shore of the Potomac River, to the west of Overlook Avenue and I-295, along the south side of JBAB, or Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, and along the north side of the Blue Plains wastewater treatment plant. In terms of existing land use, predominantly it's made up of 2 land uses, surface parking and buildings that are dedicated to research, testing, design, and evaluation. It's a relatively historic installation. It was actually born out of a newspaper interview given by Thomas Edison approximately 100 years ago, who recommended that the federal government create an all-purpose laboratory for research into military and naval matters. So based on that interview, Congress appropriated funding to construct 5 buildings initially, centered on a central mall that you see in the southern part of the installation. Those original 5 buildings were constructed between 1920 and 1923. And as development grew and outgrew the initial property, the federal government used to have an old naval gun factory located to the north, and that was used as expansion space, primarily for newer development after World War II. The heart of that space is the grounds that surround the original commandant's quarters for that naval gun foundry. In terms of the existing roadway network within the installation, it's made up of primary and secondary roadways. There's currently a single entry point into the installation off of Overlook Avenue, and that accesses a loop road around the Central Mall, which is made up of Cooley Avenue and Oberlin Avenue. There's also a primary roadway network through the northern portion of the installation, made up of Magazine Road, Young Street, and Smith Street, which you see, which is adjacent to the seawall in the very western part of the installation. There's also a secondary entrance off of Magazine Road, however, that currently is not operational at this time. The installation is primarily low-lying and flat. As you can see from the graphic, a large portion of the western part of the installation is contained within both the 100-year or 500-year flood zones. So in terms of the 5-year development program, the master plan program calls for a total development of approximately 111,000 square feet of new construction, 132,000 square feet of renovation, 131,000 square feet of demolition. Currently, there is 1 funded project and 3 likely to be funded projects within the next 5 years. The development program assumes a total employee increase of 615 workers and an employee parking reduction of 160 spaces. So currently, the only funded project at this time is a renovation of Building 97. The second project would construct a brand new 75,000 square foot 3-level addition onto Building 859. And it would also demolish 8 existing older laboratory and research buildings located along the south side of the Central Mall. So this space would be consolidated into the brand new 859 building addition. And 5 of these buildings, I would like to note that 5 of the 8 buildings that are programmed for demolition are considered historic. A third project would renovate 2 buildings, Building 6575 and Building 74. And the fourth and final project in the development program would be a relatively small addition, a 2,500 square foot addition onto Building 149, which is used by the installation as its power plant. So in terms of the longer term framework plan, as previously mentioned, This plan is a compilation of overlay strategies that are designed to evolve the Naval Research Lab into a more sustainable installation and to help guide the nearer-term development projects as implementation steps. The framework plan has a number of overlays that concentrate future employment into a more compact, efficient land use pattern, which is more easily served by transit, walking, biking, and infrastructure. Ensure space for future development on existing surface parking lots and on other appropriate land parcels. Improve internal north-south roadway connectivity. Promote walking, biking, and transit. Preserving significant views on the installation. The framework plan also identifies a number of future land parcels that would be appropriate for potential stormwater management practices, as well as potential future sustainable energy production areas. And the framework plan largely maintains the existing land use pattern that you see today. Lastly, this graphic shows a compilation of each of the overlay strategies, along with several long-term unfunded projects, such as a more extensive internal loop road, a waterfront vegetative buffer between Smith Street and the seawall, and priority development areas. This slide summarizes the transportation management plan. You will note that currently NRL has a mode share, a single occupant vehicle mode share, approximately 83%. There's a fairly ambitious 20-year goal to reduce that to 25%, and that would allow the installation to attain a 1-to-4 employee parking ratio, which is consistent with the recommended NCPC comprehensive plan goal for the installation. So staff analyzed the Naval Research Laboratory master plan based on the National Capital Planning Act and a number of the comprehensive plan's federal elements. And taking into account other recent federal master plan reviews in the area, including the Joint Base Anacostia Bowling master plan and Navy Yard master plans, with recommended waterfront buffers, employee parking and impervious surface reduction goals, and proposed increases in open green space. In addition, staff also referenced the Commission's previous 1990 review of the Naval Research Lab master plan, which had several approval recommendations that are shown up on the screen before you, including maintaining a consistent landscaped waterfront buffer with limited parking and considering structured parking to minimize the surface land dedicated to parking along the waterfront. So staff analysis and the executive director's recommendation are divided into the 4 categories that you see on the screen, and I'll paraphrase each of the recommendation slides as I close out my presentation. So regarding the master plan's organization and structure, we support its overarching structure into a long-term framework strategy component and a shorter-term development program, which contains both funded and likely to be funded projects. Regarding the development program itself, we note that the installation assumes an increase of 615 employees and an employee parking reduction of 160 spaces over the next 5 years. And we understand that the building 859 and 149 additions are not funded at this time, and therefore the detailed construction drawings have not been developed. However, due to the projected sea level rise and greater forecasted risk of flooding, we recommend that these projects be designed to minimize their intrusion into the 500-year floodplain as a more stringent design standard. And we also request to be a part of their development at a point when their floodplain impacts are more defined, yet we may also still make meaningful suggestions and changes to their plans. We recommend consultation between the Navy, DC SHPO, or DC State Historic Preservation Office, and NCPC to discuss the 5 proposed historic building demolitions, so that we can all better understand how this programming decision was made. And we request this meeting prior to submission of the final master plan. Regarding the framework plan, we support many of its strategies, such as achieving NCPC's 1-to-4 employee parking ratio, promoting infill development, supporting multimodal transportation walkability, and promoting sustainable energy production. And we generally support its direction to reflect a more sustainable installation. However, we feel that there are 4 especially strategic modifications that should be made in support of the Naval Research Lab's effort to reduce its long-term employee parking, reduce pervious surface area, improve the historic landscape, and to increase open green space, to include removing all employee parking within a 100-foot buffer of the waterfront area, eliminating the large surface lot between buildings 859 and 208, which would not only go a long way in improving the aesthetic and environmental quality of the waterfront, but this removal would also improve the view shed that is shown extending from the Naval Gun Foundry's cultural landscape within the open space and pedestrian circulation framework plan. Removing all surface parking on the Central Mall to restore the significant cultural landscape on the installation, and that would also further reduce employee parking over the long term. And finally, the Navy should designate a site near the installation's main gate for use as a future parking garage to intercept drivers and help encourage transit use, walking, and biking on the installation. And lastly, regarding the future coordination recommendations, the first point recommends future travel demand management, coordination between NRL, GSA, NCPC, and DDOT. The second point encourages future coordination between the Navy, NCPC, and District Office of Planning to figure out how to implement Live Near Your Work program, not only at NRL, but across other naval installations throughout the district. And the last point recommends future flood protection planning between the Navy, District, and other riverfront stakeholders, as well as a more comprehensive look at climate change within the next round of Navy master plans, which are due by 2018. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to entertain any questions, and we also have Bill Sadlin here from the Navy Facilities Branch, who's also available to answer any questions.
Terrific. One quick question. In comments to date or discussions to date, the Navy is receptive to the 500-year floodplain design?
In my conversations with the Navy, they're absolutely willing to consider it. I think the Navy Facilities Branch has to actually go back and meet with the installation to see how they feel about it and talk about that. But they've been very receptive to our suggestions to date, and I feel positive about that. So,
well, I'm willing to consider this EDR.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. First of all, I guess they like to be on the water, so they may be in the water if they don't take it as floodplain. But that's another thing. Is this project coming to us? I'm trying to figure out the connection between JBAB and this organization. Are you all do they operate under Joint Base Anacostia Bowling?
No, I believe the NRL is separate from JBAB.
Separate.
Right, even though it is a part of the Anacostia Bowling Tract.
Yep.
So we are advisory over the master plan.
I'm a little concerned because every installation east of the river makes some effort to reach out into the community, so we know what's going on about traffic and what their project are planning, what kind of things they're doing on their property that we might need to know about. And I don't think there's been any effort at all from Naval Research. I made some efforts a few years ago to try to create some energy along that line, but I just think it's something maybe we can have a conversation about that.
Absolutely.
Particularly if they're doing things that are creative and scientific. We have young people in our community who may need to know about that's happening in their backyard, and maybe they'll get some sparked interest in things, but they're just kind of like a closed-off area. So that may not be related to this discussion, but it will be to me. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. McCarthy.
I had a question and a comment. The last month, I guess we heard about the seawall that JBAB was doing and talked a little bit about the bathtub effect and how we've got to do that up and down with blue planes, et cetera. So the seawall does, I can't remember, does seawall encompass all of this site too?
Yes, there is a seawall that protects NRL from the Potomac River. That transforms into kind of a raised levee when you get up to JBAB and I believe around Poplar Point as well.
Right, but this will be the same height as what's being proposed for.
Well, as of right now, I don't believe there's any sort of seawall improvements planned at NRL, and that's where my last recommendation comes into. If that was the intent, is to have a more regional approach to flood protection and to study that issue.
And secondly, I would like to express our appreciation for the fact that you're officially recommending the Live Where You Work, as I know NCPC had also recommended that with regard to the, was it the JBAB or the Navy Yard? Yeah.
To JBAB at the last month. But
it's still, even if that's a really robust program, the increase that you're talking about going from 5% pedestrian to 24% pedestrian seems like an enormous increase. Did I remember those figures right?
I think my memory was that I can go back. My memory was that it was a 10% pedestrian mode share. Again, this is long term. You know, this is over 20 years, and you know, I expect this part of the city to be, you know, significantly different in 20 years in terms of development and hopefully having people, you know, reside, more of the workers residing in the local community. I can certainly, I'll go back, yeah.
Right, there we go. Yeah, 5%
to up to 34%, yeah. Yeah, I remember the bicycle.
That'd be a heck of a transportation demand management plan.
Right, these are, I mean, these are goals, you know, so, you know, and again, these are all, you know, 20-year time horizons.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're trying to, you know, increase development in St. Elizabeth's, Congress Heights, all around there, but it almost seems like we'd have to deck over blue planes to get that many people arriving on foot. It kind of strains credibility, don't you think, Arrington?
Well, I mean, the community would like to know how they're going to do that.
Yeah.
Great.
Aspirational.
Yeah, very highly aspirational, yes.
So glad that stuck.
Is there a motion on the EDR?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded, and the question before us is simply to approve the comments on the draft master plan. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the EDR say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. It's passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Wells.
Trying to work with the previous vote that the person this seat had taken regarding the visitor center had been an abstention. I was trying to be consistent. What I realize now is that I actually abstained on the overall vote, which I did not intend to do, and there was a confusion on my part. I would like to fix that.
Okay.
And I think I do that.
We have to have a motion to reconsider the vote by which we passed the EDR.
I know.
Get those people back here.
Where's our parliamentarian on I've got some clarification on that. I guess that would be the way to do that. However, I want to fix that as a vote for. I thought we were still talking about the visitor center. I got confused.
Sorry. I think Mr. Miller's motion would be, he would move that having voted on the prevailing side by which we passed the EDR, he would like to reconsider that vote.
I would move the...
Yep.
Well, wait a minute.
Okay.
We've lost some other people.
Okay, yep.
Excuse me.
My apologies to my colleagues.
Councilman Wells can change his vote up to the closure of this meeting if the commission agrees to it. So you take a vote, or if the chairman believes that it will be unanimous, he can just say yes.
I think there's no objection.
Thank you very much.
We're all feeling very generous.
I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. That prevents us from having to bring the matter back.
I'm sorry.
So I'm hearing no objection to Mr. Wells
Beth
changing
wasn't
his
here.
vote. And so again, you
No,
want to
the-
state what your intent is?
Yes, my
just so
intent
that
is to
we-
change my
change his
vote
vote,
to
not
in
on
support of the EDR related to the overall project.
Oh, I thought you did vote that way.
I thought I did too, but I'm being informed that I didn't. And that, because I was just trying to stay consistent on the
Right.
visitor center. But, so my intent, Mr. Chair, with your, with your support or whatever to change my
objection.
vote.
Yes.
Thank you very
So
much.
just to clarify, you're abstaining on the vote for the visitor center, and you're voting for the EDR
That's right.
as amended
Yep,
to include the visitor center.
yep.
Okay.
I believe that's the, make
Just say yes.
consistent. Yes.
That's what it is.
You know what they
Yes.
say about consistency, don't you?
Goblet of small minds. I apologize, I just was getting
Thank
this
you
information.
very much.
Right.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues'
Thank you
indulgence.
so much. We are adjourned.
Okay.